My roommate and I made puppets. I don't know how to use it yet, and when I say we made puppets, I mean like I picked out the felt that I liked and they stitched it together for me because they're a very good person. And Zelda apparently really likes it. It's supposed to be me. I have green hair. I used to have green hair, but not anymore. Maybe someday again. But as of right now, I'm not really good at the whole puppet thing. That is not the point of this video. I'm putting him away. So I want to grant you the gift of a perfect fantasy movie series that I can almost guarantee none of you have ever heard of. In fact, this series is probably older than a few of you who may be watching, which it blows my mind, and I don't want to think about that. I don't want to think about it at all. When I consider the various film epics we've come to love dearly in our world, the iconic fantasy series which we consider cultural touchstones, what comes to mind are the obvious. Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, Star Wars, and dare I say it, even Twilight. But what if I told you that there exists a perfectly formulated 5-movie franchise based around the secret world of fairy tales? Does that interest you at all? Then let me tell you about The Tenth Kingdom. The Tenth Kingdom, categorically speaking, is actually considered a mini-series rather than a franchise or saga, but each episode rounds out to be approximately an hour and a half long, and they all contain their own separate story beats united under a complex overarching plot, not unlike, say, Star Wars. As a side tangent, I remember the first time I watched Fellowship of the Ring, I was under the impression that Frodo and his friends would reach Mordor by the end of that first movie, and the rest of the series would explore other plots not focused around this ring business. But no, obviously it's a task that requires an entire trilogy to complete, and the Tenth Kingdom has a similar expansive goal in the sense that our main characters are trying to get from point A to point B, except there are all these detours which impede their progress along the way. After the first leg of the series, or the first movie, our cast of characters from New York are thrust into a fantasy world made up of 9 kingdoms, all of which used to be run by the famous women in Grimm's fairy tales: Rapunzel, Snow White, Little Red Riding Hood, Sleeping Beauty, etc., etc. After stepping into this world, every enemy they face and every town they visit are all in an effort to find a magical traveling mirror, which will, in so few words, allow them to return to New York City, where the people are normal and they're not trying to be killed off by trolls and evil queens. But I'm jumping a bit ahead of myself. To pull back, The Tenth Kingdom first aired on NBC in February of the year 2000. And I remember my mom actually had the box set of the series on VHS. After a few years, I managed to get my grubby little hands on the tapes, and when I was a kid, all the way into my teen years, I'd play them on my shitty little cube of a TV, the kind with the built-in VHS player and like the huge backside. I wore those tapes out. I think my mom also had the companion novelization of the film, but I never put in the effort to read it and still haven't. From what Wikipedia tells me, when the film was airing, during commercial breaks, they would advertise a toll-free number where you could order the package deal of the movies, the book, and the CD all as one. I don't actually recall having the CD as a family, but you know, we had everything else. I haven't asked her about it, but I can just imagine my mom, hi mom, calling in and ordering it as soon as the series concluded, or maybe she got it as a gift. I don't actually know. She's super into fantasy series, and either scenario makes sense in my head. Regardless, I love that I now know about this series because it secretly makes up like 40% of my personality. So, when it comes to how I'll be structuring this video, I do want to challenge myself to not spoil every plot detail from beginning to end. However, in order to have a coherent discussion about this series at all, I do need to lay a groundwork for the characters and the premise. For this reason, the very first point of discussion on my fancy numbered list will be a review of the first 2 hours of the series. You might say 2 hours, that's a lot, and yes, but rest assured, I'm still glossing over a lot of material within those 2 hours, and in the grand scheme of things, that's only like a quarter of the watch time. Even still, I'll be providing various checkpoints for you to pause the video in case you haven't seen the show and you find yourself intrigued. As a big positive, this entire series is available for free on YouTube to watch, so there's literally nothing stopping you from typing it in the search bar like above my head right now. It's okay if you pause this, I don't mind. So without further ado, let's jump into point number 1, which I have lovingly titled, Why the Hell is Everyone Running Around? so I'm gonna move around a few details, but the plot really kicks off when we see a shot of a fancy carriage traveling across an ambiguous but idyllic landscape. Inside this carriage is the first of this movie's four main characters, and arguably the least relevant when considering character development and focus. However, without him though, the entire plot would never have started rolling in the first place, so he is pretty pivotal. In so few words, he is the grandson of Snow White herself, who, after the happy ending of her fairy tale as we know it, lived on to rule her own kingdom, which will plainly be called the Fourth Kingdom. Of what we're told by Wendell's assistant, he is traveling to an outer province of his kingdom, a small village known as Beantown, to meet his people and collect the gift of a throne for his upcoming coronation party. See, not only is Snow White long dead, but Prince Wendell's parents, the king and queen, have also been dead for quite a while, I think. 7 years. Where Snow White died after a long and successful reign, Wendell's parents were poisoned and killed by a very important woman in the story who us viewers will simply know as the Queen. I'm not sure how the Queen gained that title. At one point, Wendell does call her stepmother, but we never hear about that drama of the family ties. It's not the point of the story anyway. But we know this queen killed the actual king and queen, and she planned to poison Wendell as well so she could wrest control of the Fourth Kingdom. Luckily, she got caught in time and imprisoned indefinitely. As it so happens, Wendell and his assistant, before visiting Beantown, are set to make a detour to the Snow White Memorial Prison to pay the queen a visit and deny her plea for parole. But things aren't so honky-dory in the prison right now. Not long before the prince's arrival, we meet an ugly creature known as the Troll King. The Troll King, as far as I know, isn't aware that Prince Wendell is also on his way into the prison. It mostly seems like a very lucky coincidence. See, the Troll King is sneaking his way into the prison in order to rescue his 3 idiot children. I'm going to talk about the Troll children later because they're probably the funniest part of the entire series. Or at least, they have the most obvious jokes and gimmicks in the series. They'll have their time in the sun when I talk about them later, so don't worry. Also, second side note, the Troll King uses a series of very fun magic accessories and items to sneak into the prison unannounced. The Nine Kingdoms is absolutely riddled with random mystical energy and spells and magical objects, to the point that me trying to give shape to the complex magic system, sort of like Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings, it's absolutely useless in this case. There is no structure. In short, he has 2 tools on his side. One being Troll Dust, which is this magic pink dust that can knock people out in a pinch for days on end, possibly. And second, a pair of magic shoes, which can turn him invisible for a limited amount of time. Surprisingly, despite his brutishness, the Troll King does not strong-arm his way into the prison. The Troll King does in fact run an entire kingdom on his own and has an entire army to back him up, but I don't know, I guess he wanted to keep things low-key. So, having successfully rescued his children and knocked out the entire staff with Troll Dust, you'd think they'd leave, but not quite. The queen, who is locked away in a very high-security wing of the prison, magically calls out through the ether to the Troll King and essentially bewitches him to walk to her. In so few words, he lets her out of the cell, and they strike up a deal that, if she follows through with a plan she wants to carry out, she can offer him half of Prince Wendell's kingdom. Big stuff, yeah. So, back to Wendell, he enters the prison to find himself captured by the evil queen and the troll family. Now, here is one of the most integral pieces of magics to play into the entire storyline. For whatever reason, I guess years prior, the queen requested to have a pet dog in her cell, and don't ask me why the prison even allowed her to have one, but they do. It's this really pretty golden retriever, and you see him very consistently throughout the series being a good boy. Yeah, oh my god, I love him. I wish I knew the dog actor's name. When everyone is in a room together and the trolls are holding Prince still, the queen sicks her dog at him, and when they make contact, they switch bodies. So, from part 1 to part 5, Prince Wendell is just running around with our gang of misfits as a happy puppy who very slowly loses his marbles. The queen's initial and entire plan is first to kill the prince turned dog and keep the dog turned prince as a puppet which she can rule behind, or at least at first. I always found this particular scene very strange because the queen knows she wants to kill Wendell immediately in dog form, but as she's teasing him, she turns away completely, And that allows Wendell enough time to escape, to run away. So the queen sends the Troll King to chase the dog, but the dog, running into the basement, knocks over another piece of very important magic, a magic traveling mirror. You'll notice, by the way, that most forms of magic in this universe don't typically have special names, so we're gonna hear a lot about magic rings, and magic combs, and magic fish, without much differentiation. The word magic is going to get old very, very quickly. So Prince Wendell knows the trolls are quickly on his tail, and when he knocks over this mirror, he opens a portal to what we see is New York City, specifically Central Park. The prince has no other option in front of him, so he jumps inside, and here ensues a very magical, very fun teleporting graphic. So here's where we actually meet our main character, Virginia Lewis, a disillusioned young girl in her mid-20s who lives on the edge of the park with her dad in a shitty apartment, working as a waitress to make ends meet. Virginia is easily the most complex character in the series, and I have a lot of, endgame analysis I really want to get to regarding her character growth and the challenges she faces, but you'll have to stick with me to the end of the video to really hear my thoughts on the character. But for now, what you should know about Virginia is she believes she's going to live a boring life. She considers that she might have a husband someday, and dare I say it, move out from her dad's place, but all things considered, Virginia has resigned herself to mediocrity. Some of her first dialogue is in narrative form, and she states this plainly.
I guess you get to a certain age and you realize that nothing exciting is ever going to happen to you. And maybe that's just the way it is. You know, maybe some people just have quiet lives.
And right as she thinks that to the audience, Prince jumps through the portal and collides with Virginia's bike path, making them both crash to the ground. For better or for worse, Prince has now made a detour to the 10th Kingdom, New York City. It turns out Virginia was actually biking to her waitress gig, and because she can't miss her shift, she walks her bent bike to the restaurant with Prince following behind her. She tries to get rid of him, but, he won't leave her alone at all. For now, I'm going to have to put a pin on the Virginia story thread because we need to go back and introduce one more absolutely key character. So if we're thinking back to the evil guys, the Queen and the Troll King have forged an alliance where the Troll King puts his trust in the Queen to cause some shenanigans and take over the Fourth Kingdom. But in order to succeed, she needs to have the Troll children follow her orders, and as faithful to the Queen as they may be, she knows she needs someone more substantially on her side, someone who isn't faithful first to the Troll King. So even though the Troll children are on the prince's tail, pun intended, the Queen releases another prisoner, a character who we will know by the name of Wolf, to also follow the prince. And oh my god, I love Wolf. For many reasons, I love Wolf. He's just a spunky, mischievous little guy. If the name didn't give it away, Wolf is actually part werewolf, though the most we see from a wolf form from the guy is a fluffy tail, yellow eyes, and riled up hair every now and then. If you're wondering what his real name is, it actually is Wolf, which is a little confusing because Wolf isn't the only werewolf in the world, so it sort of feels like when someone names their son Guy. At one point in part 3, he does use the fake name Warren Wolfson, so it's like, is his name Warren? No, it's not Warren, it's just for that one bit. But Wolf is easily the second most complex character in the series. In the very beginning, having been imprisoned for who knows how long, Wolf is positively pent up with energy. And by energy, I mean he is incredibly hungry for a good meal, and he's incredibly frisky, to put it best. Later, when he's more mellow, he explains to Virginia that, quote, putting a wolf into a prison cell with nowhere to bound, only able to stare at the sky through bars, now that's inhuman. Unquote. What Wolf deals with throughout the entire series is the compromise between his wolfish tendencies and his human ones. He never seeks to overrule or mask one half of himself. It's more a matter of striking the appropriate balance, because denying his wolfish side would be to deny half of his existence. And he's all the better for it, because he's an absolute goofball when he embraces it. I'd go so far as to say that Wolf holds many of the traits of a himbo. He's handsome, he can be dumb at times, and he's very kind. To give away a bit of Wolf's character, which we'll get into in a moment, he's tailing Prince Wendell, and by circumstance Virginia too, but the moment he sets sight on Virginia, he's fallen head over heels in love with her and forgets about the Queen's instructions completely. He doesn't know how to handle his love for her, and in fact goes about it in very inappropriate ways in the first episode. And this is a testament to the fact that he can't control his wolfish side sometimes. But I want to set it into stone now. Wolf's motivation throughout the entirety of this series is do right by Virginia. That means love for her, care for her, accommodate to her. Virginia markedly doesn't love him in the first half of the story, so he takes it upon himself to show Virginia what kind of man he can be and prove that they're soulmates. This means striking that balance between wolf and human and calm down those raging energies being in jail left him with. See how it all comes full circle? So the queen releases him from prison, but before he leaves her sight, she places upon him this invisible magic, the magic of the queen's evil will. Whenever the queen is in one of these sinister modes, you're always going to hear very haunting female vocals and like a glittering noise. Submitting to the queen's will, in short, essentially means she can call upon him from afar, invading his mind so she can communicate with him and enforce her desires. Because he's so one-track minded in the beginning, and frankly a bit stupid, he says yes and goes on his merry way, following Prince and the troll children through the magic portal in the basement. The last of the four main characters, and the one I probably need to give the least bit of explanation to, is Tony. Tony is Virginia's father, the one she lives with, and he is a janitor for the apartment building they're living in on Central Park. And that's the only reason they're even able to afford that place. Tony, to spare myself the need to monologue about him, is the bumbling buffoon of the series. But that's perhaps giving him too little credit. He's the Zeppo. He's the one who constantly has bad things happen to him, whether it's his own doing or the world itself punching down on him. In trying to describe Tony, I'd say he's fairly conservative-minded. Not politically conservative, I mean, like, the series doesn't even remotely touch politics in that way, but I mean he's conservative in the sense that he doesn't think outside the box a lot. He has good ideas on occasion and plays a mean hand of old maid, but his faults often overshadow his positive qualities, and unfairly so. A few things about Tony. He's long divorced, he's overworked and underpaid, he ruined a once thriving business he upstarted through a bad investment, and when prompted to make a few magical wishes, he makes very selfish and poor decisions. There's a fair few other disasters that Tony initiates later in the series, but this is what we know going in. But the thing about Tony is that he is sincerely undervalued, especially by Virginia, but also in part by the other main characters as they travel through the Nine Kingdoms. And when they realize that at the end of the series, Tony as well, it's only then that Tony receives his flowers. Otherwise, Tony's character growth is pretty static from start to finish. Now, indulge me a bit while I recount some of the shenanigans that go on in the 10th Kingdom. The rest of the story after what I'm introducing to you, you can reliably count on the fact that all four main heroes stick together and are attempting to reach a semi-agreeable goal, and if they're apart, they're still trotting along in the same general direction. But part 1 sticks out because it does all the heavy lifting in terms of defining the characters. They scramble around separately without an exact goal in mind, simply goofing off or trying to solve smaller problems. The latter is very true for Virginia, who doesn't know what to do with this dog she found and is getting harassed all around the city. Let me explain. When Virginia finally gets to work, she keeps Prince in the storage room. Also, this scene where she first shows up to work, I have no idea why nobody protests or scoffs at the fact that someone walked a dog into the room when they're preparing food. But it's fine, I guess. When he's eventually in the storage room, nobody goes back there, and only Virginia has the key to the door for some reason. She tries to do her job, but hears Prince barking back there, and has to pause work to make him quiet. But look at this. When she walks in, Prince has left a message for her in spilled flour. She thinks it's a prank, but through testing out Prince's intelligence, she freaks out when she realizes the dog is responding to her with 1 bark yes, 2 barks no. By indicating she's in danger, Wendell convinces Virginia that they must leave, and she travels back home. Meanwhile, the troll children are still around, but they aren't making much progress. Like I said before, they're idiots. Like, verified doofuses, so even though they possess the physical strength to apprehend and kill a dog, they have absolutely none of the wits to actually know where he is. One of the best bits in the series is that while they're hunting in Central Park, they pointlessly assault a couple sitting on a bench and steal their stereo, believing it to possess some kind of magic, simply because it plays Night Fever by the Bee Gees. They take the stereo back with them when they return home, and when the stereo eventually dies, they're relegated to singing of this magical folklore instead. It even lasts into part 5. But Wolf, on the other hand, is on the hunt. At first, he's so hungry that he completely forgets about Prince Wendell entirely, and when he's in New York, he is overwhelmed by the smell of meat, and follows his nose to, very coincidentally, Virginia's workplace at the edge of the park. But then, good news.
I smell dog! Oh, would you believe it? Work and pleasure combined.
So when he's sitting down as a guest of the restaurant, he talks with one of Virginia's coworkers and remembers to ask about the dog. She spills the beans that Virginia is holding onto a golden retriever, and believing Virginia to still be at work, the coworker leads Wolf to the kitchen. And this next scene confuses me because when she realizes Virginia's gone, Wolf is like, "Give me your address." And then she's like, "No." And then things get weirdly sexual. Nothing is shown of the restaurant or the girl after the scene, but it is confirmed later that Wolf obtained Virginia's address. So I'm like, how did he accomplish that? Did he eat the blonde girl? Did he have sex with her? I don't know. Wolf, after all, is known to conflate hunger with sex or sexuality simply because of his wolfish nature. And the last shot we see of the two of them is when they're standing very suggestively close to one another in the private back room. Even weirder, the next scene Wolf is in, he's calmed down considerably. His lucidity and charismatic persona always appear more present and refined when his hunger is sated, and after this story beat, that hunger is less insistent. He's still obsessive over food and love, but it's not messing with his head so dramatically. If you're wondering, by the way, Wolf was not in prison for eating people. He later describes his crime was, quote, sheep worrying, so he caused nothing more than mischief. Overall, wolves in this series are alluded to having eaten humans at some point in history, but wolves also face serious discrimination within the Nine Kingdoms in the present day, so it's possible that this is just some disparaging folklore. In the same breath, I believe in part 3, Wolf describes his parents to be especially ravenous, and that this was the cause of their persecution on a burning pyre. Whether their crimes were legitimate or not remains unexplained, which is all really to say that I don't know if he ate that girl, but he had to have sated his hunger somehow. Virginia returns home with Wendell, but when they arrive, Virginia discovers that her place, in fact her entire apartment floor, has been ransacked and various neighbors of hers are knocked out on the floor covered in troll dust. Tony even is conked out in a recliner when she walks through her front door. Yeah, the trolls found her apartment, but only through brute force. In the beginning, they managed to find Virginia's missing wallet and a patch of dog fur on the bike path.
East 81st Street.
Which eventually led them to her door after threatening a New Yorker to commute them. As much as I like them, they're mostly a distraction, so I'll leave the scene by saying that the trolls tried to catch Virginia and Wendell, but she manages to trick them by trapping them in a broken elevator and fleeing with Wendell to her grandmother's house. She leaves Tony behind because even though he's unconscious, she thinks he's relatively safe, and she's not wrong. And here's probably my favorite sequence of events that occurs in the first episode, and part of the reason why I went through the effort of chronicling everything thus far. Virginia stays at her grandmother's decked-out apartment overnight, and the next morning, having learned of where Virginia is staying, Wolf makes a visit. He poses as Virginia's rich suitor and fiancé so that Grandma lets him in the door, and after that, he gets a bit distracted, but when Virginia wakes up, Wolf does what any sane fairy tale wolf would do and dresses up as grandmother and hides in her bed. At this point, you don't really know what he's trying to do. Like, you know he's infatuated with Virginia because prior to the scene, he visited Tony's apartment and obtained an image of Virginia, who he now finds to be the most beautiful woman in all the kingdoms. Whether that means he wants to start a happy family with her or turn her into dinner remains to be clarified. But he doesn't even try to capture the prince. Instead, when Virginia realizes it's a strange man in her grandmother's bed, she naturally treats him like an intruder and tries to fight him off. Meanwhile, Wolf is waxing very manic poetic about his feelings for her, which really, at this point, is just exaggerated infatuation.
Now that I've seen you, eating you is out of the question. Not even on the menu. Now, I know this is going to come out of the blue, but how about a date?
Luckily, Virginia manages to toss him out of, like, her grandmother's second-story window. The way Wolf feels about her remains very conflicted even after their first confrontation, because not long after, in a very inconsequential scene with a French therapist, he laments about his feelings.
Doc, I met this terrific girl, and I really, really, really like her. But the thing is that...
Say?
Not sure whether I want to love her or eat her.
Moving on, though, I can skip a lot of the subplots in this episode, specifically involving Tony, because functionally speaking, yes, they help build his character, but plot-wise, they're very inconsequential. In short, Tony has harnessed the power of 6 wishes, all of which he completely wastes on selfish, questionably immoral things, and they all come back to bite him in the ass. The crux of this episode is when Virginia leaves her grandmother's house with Wendell. She takes him back to Central Park and tries to leave him where she found him, because she's tired of being chased by weird trolls and sexually ravenous home intruders. Just to pause, when I first wrote that line, sexually ravenous home intruder, it sounded awful. I'm describing Wolf, and I can't say that I'm describing him incorrectly, but a thing about Wolf is that while yes, he's very riled up, he also feels very innocent. Sort of like a puppy who doesn't know how to play correctly yet. Like, if you left him alone in the house for a while, you'd come home to find all of your couch cushions torn open and stuffing everywhere. You'd punish him, but you also might think, that little rascal. In that way, I think a viewer can rationally suspend disbelief on the questionable behavior of Wolf simply because of his wolfish hormones, but in the same breath, I also think that unfairly absolves him from his ogling and infatuated monologuing. It's played off fairly well, I think, but at the end of the day, I still think a viewer should interrogate those flaws in Wolf's writing. The point is, beyond that critique, in attempting to drop off Wendell in the park, we experience a confluence of all the characters in New York City thus far. Tony, because of his own shenanigans, is running from the cops in the park. Meanwhile, Wolf is on their tail and the trolls have escaped from the elevator. Tony meets up with his daughter and Wendell, and the only good wish Tony ever makes, which is also his last wish, is that he wants to understand the dog. This is very important. Tony becomes the only individual in the series who can understand Wendell in his dog form, who seemingly telepathically talks to Tony. Which, thank God they never tried to animate the dog's mouth. That is such a good visual effects decision. I can't thank them enough. After that point, Wendell leads them back through the portal in Central Park to escape the cops, and so concludes our time in the 10th Kingdom, even though it's the title of the entire series. Rest assured, Wolf and the trolls do make their way back through the portal in their own time, and then the magic portal is closed, keeping out the rest of the real world. Remember now that the mirror itself is stored in the basement of the Snow White Memorial Prison, so they're not exactly walking freely in the countryside. They have a bit of time before the bad guys catch up with them, so they walk through the prison and find that all the guards are still knocked out with the troll dust. Wendell takes the opportunity here to describe the 9 kingdoms and all the politics involved, but I'm going to wait to explore those elements in point number 2, which is right around the corner. After the exposition, instead of immediately escaping, the 3 of them inspect the Queen's prison cell for some reason, which don't ask me why. This ends up screwing them over because the trolls find them, and because the trolls are incompetent, instead of capturing the dog like they're supposed to, they close the cell door on Tony and Prince. Meanwhile, they knock out Virginia and steal her, fleeing thereafter to the Troll Kingdom. I really don't know why they couldn't have done their job. Blabberwort, the sister troll, says it's because the troll dust on the guards will wear off any moment and they have to act fast. But it's still an incomprehensible decision. They think Virginia is a witch because of the elevator debacle, but that's all we get in terms of real motivation. So Tony and Prince are for real imprisoned when the guards wake up and find them, and the troll children flee to the Troll Kingdom with Virginia over their back. I'm not covering the prison arc. I actually think it's quite boring and unremarkable. Like, can you imagine your first foray into a magical dimension was in a prison? Like, ugh. Instead, we're going to follow Virginia as she's taken to the troll castle and tied up. She's going to be tortured for information because the trolls believe she's some big league conspirator for what they dub to be the 10th Kingdom, which is NYC itself, and want to know who their king is. But here's the rub. Wolf comes in and saves her, using the troll's stupidity against them. The Troll King is out on the town and still planning shit out with the evil queen, so for whatever reason, he's left his magical shoes on display in the troll's shoe collection. It's this big weird feet joke. It's not really that important. What is important is on her way out, Virginia nabs the shoes without Wolf knowing. By the way, she absolutely does not trust Wolf and plans to escape his side as soon as she's able by wearing the shoes, but she never gets far because Wolf knows her scent and can follow her anywhere. It's very romantic. The shoes are very weird. As they're escaping through Jack's beanstalk forest, of all places, Virginia is constantly enthralled by the shoes, practically drunk on their power, or potential power. But the shoes, unlike most magics, have a battery life and must recharge for hours on end, so in large part, if she's not wearing them, Virginia is just fawning over them. There's a really nice character beat for Wolf here because it's a brief switch in their lucidity. Wolf is now in his element in the Nine Kingdoms and maintains a fairly level head. Meanwhile, Virginia, when Wolf is holding the shoes, tries to seduce Wolf while under their enthrall, trying to get them back. One of the reasons I really like Wolf is that he doesn't play into Virginia's weird sexual advances because he knows they're hollow. Instead, he continuously rebuffs her until she finally drops the act and returns to her usual self. And here's the first scene where the two of them really actually bond for the first time. I'd say this is important because if they were not allowed this moment to hide from the Trolls' hunting party, they likely wouldn't have stuck together throughout the rest of the story. Virginia, understandably, finally asks Wolf why he was involved in the chase and intuits that he too was a prisoner set free, but doesn't actually ask who set him free. That's left out of their conversation entirely. He explains what put him in jail, but then the conversation shifts to something very vulnerable, Wolf's tail. The thing is, this scene has some very present sexual innuendo attached to it. In parts 3 and 5, this innuendo is played up again in different ways, so it's not exactly an accident on the writer's part. Wolf's tail, in so few words, is regarded as a fairly intimate erogenous zone, which Wolf himself roughly equates to breasts in terms of like acceptability of exposure, I guess. And I don't know, I guess it's testament to the fact that I first watched this series as a kid, but I never considered this scene very sexual, despite the writers heavily leaning into it. What I see in this scene is that Wolf's tail is a very corporeal representation of Wolf's immediate decision to be open and vulnerable for Virginia. Once he's able to calm down significantly and join Virginia's side, he really does come to terms with the fact that he loves her and wants to be with her, and he never shies away from showing her every aspect of who he is, both the good and the bad. Knowing that Wolfkind are actively discriminated against, persecuted, and in many cases killed in the Fourth Kingdom, including his parents, Wolf allowing Virginia to even see his tail, let alone give it a pet, shows he's not trying to hide from her, even if it's dangerous. We're nearly at the end of my opening review. The plan at this point is to return to the prison, use the shoes to sneak in and release both Tony and Wendell, and then find the mirror to go home. But the prison's been up to some shenanigans. After the guards wake up, they determine that the basement was disturbed or ransacked while they were sleeping, and thus cast suspicion on all the antiques stored down there. So they set up a trash boat outside the prison walls and throw all the junk on it to later be moved away. This includes the mirror. On his own, Tony discovers that his prison mates have painstakingly been carving away a tunnel to the outside for years, and he convinces them to let him escape as well. Luckily, Wolf and Virginia find Wendell and escape too, so now the entire cast is unified as a group, finally. Unfortunately, Acorn, one of Tony's prison mates, that's played by Warwick Davis of all people, takes the trash barge with the mirror and travels off to God knows where, while Tony isn't looking. And so initiates the much less complicated journey our characters will embark on to find the mirror and go home. And in the same breath, so ends this introductory review. I've alluded to it already, but nearly every character in this foursome, besides Virginia and Tony, have different goals in terms of what they seek to accomplish in the world. Of course, Virginia and Tony want to go home, but Wolf's single desire is to make Virginia fall in love with him, or rather, make Virginia realize she's already in love with him. There's no literal point A and point B for Wolf, but if assisting with Virginia's adventures means he can get closer to her, then he's on board. Meanwhile, Prince Wendell's prerogative is entirely different. He, of course, wants to be turned human again so he can resume his coronation, become king, and probably get revenge on the evil queen. To do so, he forcibly enlists Tony, who is the only person who can understand him, to be his manservant, much to Tony's disagreement. No. He's not seeking the mirror, and in fact regularly complains that Tony shouldn't be looking for the mirror because he should be helping Wendell instead. I like that Prince has entirely separate motivations, but I also feel like the writers didn't take these conflicting motivations far enough. Seemingly against Prince's personal goal, Wendell will often assist in Virginia and the team's schemes to find and obtain the magic mirror, even though he has virtually no incentive to do so. I think I would have liked to see a bit more conflict in that regard, but Wendell, for the most part, is relegated to having the least complex character arc among the main cast, so his use as a pawn largely goes unchallenged. With all the characters in the main adventure set up finally, let's move on to point number 3. Where the hell are we? So I've described that the 10th Kingdom is New York City, and oh, wait. Isn't this third one? Is it point number 2? What was point number 1? Let's move on to point number 2. Where the hell are we? So I've described that the 10th Kingdom is New York City, and I've talked about the fact that the 4th Kingdom is run by the lineage of Snow White. So what else do we know? Well, in part 1, when our characters have just entered the portal and all the guards in the prison are still asleep, we see a map of the 9 kingdoms. Prince Wendell describes to Tony that the stories we learn of Snow White, Cinderella, and all the other great fairy tales occurred about 200 years prior, and the audience can reasonably deduce through this explanation and the map that the other great women went on to run their own kingdoms. This later gets validated when Wolfe explains the lore of the 5 great women who changed history. Also, apparently Sleeping Beauty is still around, but if you look at this really blurry map of the 9 kingdoms, she wasn't even a great ruler. She actually appears to just be a citizen of Cinderella's kingdom, so that sucks. She got demoted. And for what? We don't know. So you might be thinking, this is so exciting. We get to explore the 9 kingdoms. I can't wait to see a little bit of everything. Well, I hate to break it to you, but we don't. Like, we see nearly none of them. We stay in the 4th Kingdom for virtually the entire series, except for 2 story beats. One of these deviations is near the beginning, with the Troll Kingdom, also known as the 3rd Kingdom, the one with the magic beanstalks. And the second instance is in the 4th movie, when our characters unwittingly trespass into the mines of the 9th Kingdom. But this kingdom doesn't even have a great queen. It's just run by dwarves who make magic mirrors in an underground cave system. They appear to be some derivative lineage of dwarves from Snow White's story, and this proves to be more legitimate of an idea because Snow White's grave is magically hidden in one of the fancier caves, but other than that, there's absolutely no glamour or intrigue. It's an important pit stop, but in the grand scheme of things, it's a very disappointing end to the other kingdoms. However, the final chapter does give us a glimpse of what all the various royal lines look like. We see the descendants of Red Riding Hood, we see some elves and ice queens, and there's even a special cameo from the only living great queen, Cinderella. So it's a fair enough consolation prize. I just think it was a completely wasted opportunity. That said, the 4th Kingdom does have a diverse series of towns, bogs, and castles for our main characters to travel through. Among the various sets our characters visit, we have Little Lamb Village, Kissing Town, the Palace of White, the Disenchanted Forest. Even dispersed along the way, we also encounter various iconic locations from Snow White's story. The 4th Kingdom itself, to refer to that map again, is situated in the very center of the fairy tale world, with most of the other nations bordering it. Its location is highly coveted by the other kingdoms because of that strategic central location, and while it's not commented on more than once, the other kingdoms are essentially nipping at the 4th Kingdom's heels to gain its territory. Beyond that, not much is known about the other kingdoms. In reading the Wikia a little bit, there are actually some interesting descriptions about the other kingdoms, and I'm assuming these come straight from the book, but they also read like it could be complete fanfiction. As a regular peruser of these Wikia pages across various fandoms and titles, I'm aware of the fact that there's very little fact-checking and revision which goes into them. I would say, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm rebuking that for this instance. Yes, big franchises will probably have highly scrutinized Wikia pages, but the same can't be said for any title that even remotely falls into obscurity. Wikia is the real Wild West Wikipedia we were warned about in high school. And that about sums it up for my second point. Yeah, these other points, we're probably going to run through them much faster. So to move on to point number 3, magical objects, spells, and other random crap. So as we've already partially observed, the 9 kingdoms are absolutely riddled with various magics, mystical energies, and generally fantastical creatures that can help or hurt Virginia and the team on their quest. As I was viewing the series, I made sure to take note of every consequential piece of magic which affects the plot, regardless of whether it's incredibly important, such as the magic traveling mirror, or it's the mere aura of magic, lightly nudging a character along. I knew going into this that I could simply review the magic like I do everything else, but because I've done enough of that with the plot itself, what I want to do instead is insert a tier list. So I decided to change up this part of the video. Obviously you cannot see my face right now, but also I've decided to go off the cuff for this one, so I don't have a script prepared right in front of me. I have decided to just try to be myself because, as you know, I am a person. I am in fact human. So theoretically, I can speak without a script, So let's just see how it goes. As we go through these various pieces of magic, I'll let you know that I'm keeping it vaguely chronological, but vaguely is the key word there. As I was going along and as I was realizing there's various groups to things, I put various magics into some categories just to keep things organized. And so for that reason, it is not perfectly chronological. In fact, it's probably better for that. As an asterisk, I've decided to not mention any magics that are exclusively from the book or any of the magics that were from the Wikia. I'm assuming they're real, but even so, I've decided not to go with it. But as a sort of like a single example that I can give you from that, I did find one that was interesting and really in depth. So if you're looking at Rapunzel's kingdom, for example, you'll notice in the Wikia at least that there's actually like a whole viney, thorny wall that covers the border of the entire country, or the kingdom as you can call it, and nobody's been able to get in or out since actually for like 100 years. And additionally, in that same country, there is like just a countrywide curse where everyone is under a sleeping spell, I guess because Sleeping Beauty is also in that same country. Really, there are more magics that I clearly cannot touch on, and probably some that even Simon Moore, the creator of the series itself, the writer, probably has in his head that he's never let out. Just keep that in mind, but for our sake, I'm not going to touch on those. That would make this particular section like especially long. So you can't see all the images down here, but you will in a minute. I will preface, here we are, that there are no words on here. You're just gonna have to take my word for it. I know what each of these means. Like if you see here down with Snow White, obviously, there's like 3 identical pictures of Snow White, but I know what they mean. I know what the differences are. So you can trust me on that end. We'll get to them when we get to them. So to dive into the actual video now, we can start with the very first one. A few of these right at the beginning I've already introduced simply because of the fact that we covered, say, the first 2 hours or just a little bit of the first 2 hours. The first one here, as you can see, is, well, they're the magic shoes that the Troll King owns. Here we are. Oh, right. Here are our tiers. I didn't even go over our tiers. So before I do, there are 6 tiers to this list. I don't know how evenly this is going to be distributed. I'm not the kind of person that thinks that a tier list needs to be bell-shaped. Sometimes the world doesn't work out that way, especially in a magical, chaotic world. So I would like to see it is good. It means I want to have it, or I would like to have it around me. I mean, some items I could feasibly possess, or maybe it's like it's a kind of person and I want them around me. Things of that nature that I would love to have in my real life in some way, shape, or form. The second one is neat party trick. So these are good things, but you know, in the grand scheme of things, maybe I mean, they're just there. They're good, and I'm like, cool. I'd love them to have in my world, but ultimately they don't really affect me. I wouldn't want them. I guess you could say this is pretty much like a shopping list of sorts. Then there's mundane, useless even. I think that explains itself. That and the next section, questionable and annoying, kind of go hand in hand. They're very similar, but obviously they're in the middle, so it's sort of like neutral positive and then neutral negative. Is that redundant? Whatever. You get what I mean. Then there's overpowered. This maybe doesn't necessarily belong in the 5th section, but I would say so because anything that's overpowered, I just don't like it. Like, we'll get into a few of them, but some of them can give you so much power and you have so much influence over the world around you that it makes it not fun at all. So yeah, I just don't find that to be exciting in my world. I still want to face like an exciting, you know, trials and tribulations, but I don't want to just have everything handed to me. And then just plain bad is just plain bad. These are things that are just curses, things that are very strictly not good for you, placed upon you, and it's bad. This is why I need a script most of the time, because I sort of just talk over myself a lot. So now that I sort of backpedaled and got to talk about those categories, the next thing we'll do is talk about these damn shoes. So the shoes are really unique in this world for the fact that they're one of the only kinds of magic that really comes with like a rule book. They're the only ones that really come with an express negative, like a drawback, and still having positive qualities. You have to charge these shoes. You cannot simply wear them all the time. They make you invisible. And in order to have like a full day's worth of invisibility, I guess, you have to let them charge for, I'm assuming, like a similar amount of time. I don't think it's like a phone. You can charge a phone in like an hour or two, and then it lasts all day or 2 days or more. But yeah, this doesn't seem so forgiving. In addition to that, these have a kind of thrall, or they enthrall people. Specifically, we see two people actually taken over by the thrall, and that is one, the Troll King, which is a bit more subtle, but obviously he loves these shoes. He's pretty much obsessive over them. But also we see Virginia very obsessed about these shoes when she gets her hand on them, when she sees them. And she doesn't know magic that well, or at all really, because she just came from New York City. So she doesn't really know how to handle it. We also see the likes of the troll children and Wolf around the shoes. And at one point, even Wolf wears them. Some people are affected less by them, but purely for the fact that they're aware of the negative aspects of the shoes. So as much as I would like to say I want these shoes, I don't want to have an addiction to a single pair of shoes. That just doesn't seem good. I wouldn't call these mundane. I mean, you could theoretically say this is questionable, but ultimately these do have like a positive to them, and I think you could potentially use them sparingly if you just are aware of them. But, you know, try it once and then you're stuck on it for the rest of your life. I don't know. Tentatively, I want to put this in neat party trick because, I mean, it would be neat party trick. But also, practically speaking, I don't know how many times in my real life I truly need to be invisible. The next thing we have on our list is troll dust. And I'll put this in just plain bad for now. So the evil trolls use this all the time, and you would think, oh yeah, that means it's bad. But the good thing about the troll dust is that, I mean, it knocks people out for days. I guess there's positives and negatives to this, because obviously sometimes troll dust can make someone conked out for maybe a few hours, like Tony, because he wakes up in the same day he's hit with the dust. But other people, like the guards in the jail, they are asleep for at least a whole day, if not longer. So it's a bit unreliable. But I'm just imagining the medical uses of troll dust. Like, if you need to put someone under anesthetic, I'm sure if you had like trained doctors in NYC with their hands on this substance, they would be able to, I mean, in addition to scientists, they'd be able to use this exceptionally well. So, I mean, I don't need troll dust personally, but I think troll dust is fantastic. The next one is this dog. This is the queen's dog. When the dog touches another person, or maybe specifically the prince, they switch bodies. Or I wouldn't even call it switching bodies. They transform into one another. And I mean, there's just no getting around this. This is just plain bad. So I won't really go on with that anymore. The next one is, what is this? This is the magic bean. But later in the series, this is called the magic dragon dung beetle. So I don't know why anybody would eat this. This gives you 6 wishes. In addition, I don't know where Wolf gets this. He was in jail, he was released, he goes into the real world. So did he just have this on him in jail, ready to use it, I guess maybe to trade? I mean, theoretically, wishes are great. And in that way, you might say it's overpowered because they're wishes, they can do anything. But at the same time, they have this sort of typical trope where a wish often backfires. And because Tony is the one who eats this, and he's like a bumbling buffoon, he wastes all but the last wish on bad stuff. So, or at least he doesn't think his wishes out well. So clearly, this is a bad thing. This would go on the bottom half of the list somewhere. I'm not going to say anything quite yet, but I am always under the assumption, like, if I were ever given a certain amount of wishes, I would go to a lawyer. I would find a lawyer friend, and I would say, like, hey, this is magic. Please help me draft up a tightly written wish that would not backfire on me. But that's not the world we live in. That's not the world Tony lives in. So I'm going to say, I mean, yes, it's questionable, but I'll put it in overpowered. Because it's not any of these other categories. You could put it in just plain bad, but under the right circumstances, especially with the last wish that Tony uses it on, it does come in handy. He uses the last wish to be able to understand Prince, as we previously discussed. So I'll keep this in overpowered. This is the Magic Traveling Mirror. This one specifically allows you to go to New York City and back. Now, as you can see here, I lined up all the mirrors. So that's our first category that we're going to address. This is one of the largest categories we have. And Yes, this is overpowered, but ultimately it's good. I will say, I'm going to put this right now in neat party trick, because if you're in New York City, which, I live in the real world, I live in, on Earth. On that side, the portal is amorphous. It's not real. Like, you cannot turn it on and off when you want to. So it's neat. Like, it would be nice to see. Like, maybe one day I can take a vacation, but ultimately I'm not that concerned about going to the Nine Kingdoms. Things seem to go badly there, so I'll just leave it as a neat party trick. The next one is also a traveling mirror. This is something that the Queen has. You see this, I think, in part 4, maybe part 5. It turns on its own, and the Queen can magically teleport herself to an evil bog, a very important evil bog where a very important dead evil person lives. But ultimately, there's no other place that this mirror can go to. I'm assuming there must be there are sister mirrors, so you can put one in one place and one in another. But ultimately, nobody's going to the bog, so I would just say this is mundane and useless. I personally do not need to go to an evil witch's bog. Next on our list, we have the communicating mirror. So the Queen, I don't know if I've discussed this yet in the video, she has unearthed all these old mirrors from the last evil queen's basement. So most of these mirrors are hers, with a few exceptions that we've already discussed. This is a communicating mirror. It's very much like FaceTime, but in my notes I put it's like FaceTime but angrier, because if the person you're trying to contact is not in front of a mirror, they will get splitting headaches and basically be under the Queen's thrall until that person can find a mirror. So as handy as it is, I would put this in questionable and annoying, especially if I'm on the receiving end. Can you imagine getting a call from your mom? When you get it, you get a stab in your head. Yeah, I don't know about that one. This one is the classic magic talking mirror, so the one from the original story, I'd hazard guess. The one that can talk, and the one who the old Queen used to say, mirror, mirror on the wall to. This one has a few tricks up its sleeve. It can spy on others for the Queen and report back to her. But also, there was one scene in part 5 where Virginia's looking into it, and it deceives her in what she sees. So this one is pretty versatile. This is like having a personal assistant, so why the hell not? It doesn't really hurt anybody as far as I can tell, unless you use it that way intentionally. This image is so vague. The actual mirror itself is vague. You might be able to see there's an eye, and here is a mouth. There's supposed to be an eye. You cannot see the face very well. This is Gustav. This is the this is the other talking mirror in the series. You meet him in part 4, and he's very much like the other guy, but worse. He is very old, and so he's very hard of hearing, so you have to yell out the top of your voice to have him hear you. But in addition to that, you also have to think on your feet. Because he's old, he only responds to you if you speak in rhyme, rhyme that's fairly well versed. And that's really annoying. I'm sorry, but well, there we go, annoying. I keep him there because as handy as he could be, I don't want to have to yell at the top of my lungs to get an answer on something, even if it's special. This is a truth mirror. I could try to explain this, but I can't. The truth mirror lets you see the truth in things. I'm not going to zoom in because who knows how awkward that would look. But you can see maybe prints here, and then there's human prints on the other side. This is Wendell. So it allows you to see through magical veils, I imagine. As handy as that could be under very special circumstances, I'd call that useless. It doesn't speak. You can't ask it questions. It cannot tell you the truth of things. So it really is just a visual indicator of magic. This one is from Snow White. This is given to Virginia by Snow White. This one's very vaguely described. Snow White says, "This will show you what you do and do not want to see." That's vague. That's well, it's not contradictory, but it's confusing. So my first inclination is to put it in this category, but it is inherently positive, even if it shows devastating things. Well, I'm not going to spoil this yet, but it can show you what you need to see, I guess, is a better way of describing it. And that can be helpful and hurtful. So as harsh as it could be, as tough as it could be to maybe see, I would put this in I would like to see it. I want to improve myself. And the last kind of mirror I have is every other kind of mirror. So There's this point in the series where we visit an underground mine full of mirror makers, and this one librarian, I guess I can call him, this guy who indexes all mirrors, has this thick book full of names, like a full list of mirror titles. You really can't see it from here, but I have a list, and this is going to be like a sub-tier list. Overall, I'm going to put these in mundane and useless, simply because most of them fall into that category. But I have a mini tier list here, so the worst on this particular list, and this is all from the T category, so that's why they all start with T. The worst ones are the thunderous mirror, the tilting, and then the tipsy mirror, which I guess falls over on you. The tragic mirror, because that doesn't seem productive. And then the traitorous mirror. Like, can you imagine you get a mirror just... No, like that's counterintuitive. I don't want a mirror that will immediately betray me. Useless, and then literally just a mirror category is thrifty mirror, tight-lipped mirror, because I mean, theoretically, every single mirror is tight-lipped. Same with tongue-tied, as well as tiny mirror, that's just a mirror, and then traditional mirror, which is just a mirror. Confusing. Words that don't make sense for a mirror are title mirror, titular mirror, token mirror, tractable mirror, and trailing mirror. I mean, you might make an argument about tractable mirror if you look the word up, but I don't see what those can mean. And the only good ones on this list would be maybe a tidy mirror that keeps itself clean, a topical mirror that, I don't know, I mean, maybe it tells you the news, and then a tranquil mirror, which, you know, maybe makes you calm. I don't know. Those are the only ones. So I'm going to overall keep this in mundane and useless, because most of them just make no sense or are not helpful. And that covers all of the mirrors, except for one point that's tangential. A certain kind of magic that exists in the world is bad luck. If you break a magic mirror and not a regular mirror, you get 7 years of bad luck, and it's additive. So if you break multiple mirrors, you will have maybe 7, then 14, then 21. It's not multiplicative. If you break multiple mirrors, it doesn't make that one particular 7 years very bad. It just adds more and more on to your lifespan of bad luck. So that sucks. What else? Oh, and when we're talking to that librarian in the mines, he describes breaking a magic mirror like murder. And I can sort of get behind that, because if we're talking about the actual talking mirrors, yeah, that's murder. You're killing someone. I mean, obviously this is just plain bad. There's no good that could come out of this. The next one, and this is, we're done with mirrors now. The next one is one I very much love. As I talked about earlier, there are very few magic objects that have proper names to them, but this one does. This next one does. I'll put him here for now. This is the world-famous Golden River goldfish, and I love this guy. I mean, it's not alive, but it might as well be. Simply, first, because it has a name. It starts off on the right foot immediately. And second, when you find this fish, you also notice that there's a little page next to it that has its own rhyme.
Stick a finger in my mouth, turn around till you face south, touch a thing that you would prize, and you will not believe your eyes. Here is magic to behold. All that glitters can be gold.
So, yeah, you essentially can turn things gold once you put your finger in this fish. And I mean, I'm sorry to spoil it for you, but ultimately it is fool's gold because, I mean, especially, you know what? I'm having an epiphany. I think if you touch a person, it turns into fool's gold, but maybe if you touch like an actual object that's inanimate, maybe it becomes real gold. That's my assumption, but really it's finicky in that way. So you don't always get real gold. And plus, it seems like mostly like doofuses and dinguses find this thing and then like get themselves killed. Or at least that's my headcanon. So theoretically, this would be very, very good. Like, without the negatives, you could put this in I would like to see it. But simply for the like risk factor, like if I can turn something into gold with my pinky, what if I accidentally touch something I wasn't supposed to? Very, very Midas-like. So I'd put this in a neat party trick. I wouldn't want this, but maybe I'd like applaud it if I saw someone else turn something into gold. I'd be like, hell yeah, that's cool. But otherwise, no. To move on, I have a shortish category here, focused around a character we have not discussed yet. His name is the Huntsman. We're going to have a whole section later in the video where we describe the Huntsman, but in short, he is bad. He is an antagonist. But he has 3 pieces of magic down here, you can see his face as well, that I find to be relevant enough to put into this tier list. So the first one, and probably the most notable, is this crossbow that looks like an eagle. This is a magical crossbow. When you fire this crossbow, it will never miss a target. It will always hit the heart of a living being, whether you're aiming at a certain thing or you're just shooting off randomly. Like at one point even, or the first time you see it, the huntsman shoots it off into the woods and it misses every tree and lands in a deer. This seems very cool, but that's very reckless. I mean, you can always just keep the bolts out of the crossbow, but this is not going to do anything good in my personal hands. So it could belong in Overpowered. Again, I don't want it, but I could see someone else use it. Oh, but it's not just plain bad. You could probably find good in it. So I think it belongs up here, and it's not useless. Maybe it's questionable. I could put it down here, but I think the positives outweigh the negatives. Then there's this. So it's very simple. He lives in a tree. To open the front door, he puts his hand or his knuckles on the tree and the vines disappear and the doors open. And I think that is fantastic. If I'm looking for like a high security sort of kind of technology, nobody's going to expect for this to work, to put my fist on the wall and the door opens. And especially, I think it's very much catered to his fist. Nobody else is seen doing it. So I think if I had this installed in my home, oh my God, I would love it. I would like to see it. And then this one, I love this image. He has extrasensory perception. It's very strange, like very, very random and not at all commented upon. So he lays down on the ground and puts his ear against the ground. And then we sort of flash over to where Virginia and Tony are, and he just immediately can track them, I guess. I mean, I clearly can't get my hands on this, but, you know, if I somehow could train myself to have this kind of thing, I think it'd be fantastic. Again, I guess I do have a bell here. Look at that. That's fantastic. Just not the right one. The next one is this. So I'm going to call her the Enchantress. That's just a name I gave her. Really, she, much like my criticisms from the Buffy video, this woman is Romani. And if you want my criticisms about, you know, Romani representation around the turn of the millennium, you can go back to that video. I recommend it. It's the only other video that I have. But this is just questionable because she is, yeah, she's Romani. She's used for a plot. That said, I think if you had her insulated from this Romani plot, she's still an interesting character, simply because she's sort of intense and she foretells things before they really happen. I'm not going to dive any more of this criticism, but the things she can do, she can tell fortunes, she can read tarot, which, yes, I know people can read tarot in real life, but I'm assuming her tarot is very accurate, and she can perform curses. I'm not going to dive into what that curse is, but if you've seen the series, you know what that curse is. I find it very funny. I mean, I'm going to assume her skills are learnable. Do I have the time to learn those I wouldn't call it party tricks, but I don't have the time personally to train in those particular kinds of magics. I feel like it would take a long time. She's the only one in her troupe who can do them. So I would put this and I would like to see it, but I'm not going to spend my whole life becoming like what she is. So I'll put her here. I'd love to have my fortune told. Oh my God, yeah. The next category we have, which will cover, let's see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 of our next points are what I call the species section. So this is just magical or magically, like alluded to be magical species in the series. Yeah, we'll go through these pretty quickly. This one, these are magical talking songbirds. There's a lot of just talking species in this series, but these are special just because they're basically endangered because people or rich people believe that if they ate them, they can just consume and absorb the magic that is within them inherently. So we know they're magical. One can like make a sort of assumption that maybe talking animals are normal in this universe and therefore they're not magic, but that confirms them as magical. I would say they're pretty neat. It just, for the purpose of the series, they are helpful. Someone helps these birds out and then the birds help them out in return eventually. So they are theoretically really handy, but practically speaking, for the layman such as myself, they're not going to come in handy. So I'd put them here in mundane and useless. Like most animals to me, I don't really find use for because they're animals. Beyond that, here's the talking toad. This man not only covers the talking toad, but also the talking mice, which are in part 5. These are both in part 5. And this basically covers any other talking animals within the universe. And I would put them in this category, but I will say, like, you might think of the toad if you've seen the series and say, but he's, like, evil. He's, like, not a good guy. He's an evil toad. But contrarily, the mice are good. So what I would say is maybe, like, hashtag not all toads. I don't think every toad is evil. And maybe like there's an evil bird or maybe there's an evil mouse. So even though this guy particularly is an asshole, I wouldn't go so far as to say that every toad is an asshole. So I'm going to put them again in mundane and useless. Then we're going to get into the more humanoid species. So I almost forgot about this, but Wolf himself is like a magical species. He's a werewolf. I already talked about this. But yeah, he has glowing eyes, his hair riles up, he has a tail. And arguably, again, like, because this is probably just a normal race in their universe, maybe it's not magic, but he does have glowing eyes every now and then. And that inherently just feels a bit more magical than, you know, say, just having a tail. I mean, I would love to be a wolf, or like a werewolf. Oh, God, people are going to call me furry. Don't quote that. Please don't. It'd be neat to be a werewolf. That's where I put it at the start. But then I think about all the negatives, such as the full moon and accidentally mixing up whether I'm attracted to a person or hungry to eat them. I think there's enough negatives to potentially put this, in questionable and annoying. There are positives, but there are also negatives. There's this girl. She's so random. She seems like a Deus Ex Machina, but like not at the end of the series and not even at the end of her movie. When they arrive in a town called Kissing Town, she just shows up for like a minute. She can tell fortunes or like guide people along the way. So you're like, hell yeah, I love that. Like maybe in these categories. But she only tells fortunes when you give her a coin. So she's going and playing bad for being a capitalist. Here are some pixies. So you've already seen like a clip, or you should have seen a clip already, of fairies that are human-sized. But you can't tell from here. But these pixies are just like the size of maybe one's hand. There is a differentiation between pixies and fairies, but I'd probably hazard a guess that they are related in some way. But when we are talking about these particular pixies, they are questionable and annoying. They are the definition of that because, I mean, I could put them in plain bad, but again, not all pixies. They cause deliberately some shenanigans for no reason. They're just sinister. So they are landing there unless I learn more about them in the future. Then we have dragons. These are bones for a reason. It's alluded to, or maybe it's evident that all dragons are extinct. I mean, I guess they were hazards. I don't know if they're overpowered because they're dead. I mean, they were certainly they probably terrorized the nation, or all nations, but they're dead now. So do they belong in overpowered? No. Do they belong in bad? Not anymore. Oh, I guess they're going to go on mundane because they're just not around. I can't do anything with them. I mean, I would like to see them, but it's just who I am. The next subcategory is only too long. These are poisons. I really didn't know if they belonged in this category or in this tier list at all because I don't know if the poisons are magic, but I'd rather be safe than sorry. So I can put these together. So this is the poison apple, you know, from the Snow White story. And then this is a poison comb. Fashionable, and it's hard to see actually from this image. I couldn't find a clear one. But really, I don't know. They're just bad. Like, what's the use of a poison besides to kill? All right. The next one is this axe. This is a special axe, obviously. This axe can cut through anything. And when I mean anything, I mean anything. Even other kinds of magic that are a bit more restrictive. And this is better than that crossbow, which can kill anything it shoots at. Simply because, I mean, I think it's harder to try and kill someone with this axe than the crossbow. So this would go, I would love this. This would come in handy. I did want to make an asterisk thing here because I realized when talking about species, I forgot about one, but it's fine because it wouldn't have gone on this tier list anyway. The one I'm missing is trolls, so you may have already thought about that. But I wouldn't put trolls on this tier list because where everything else seems to have like an illusion or a connection to magic, trolls, much like humans, seem to just be a species. I wouldn't find them to be magical enough to put on this tier list. So that's my sort of addendum to species. Is that the right word, addendum? Whatever. To keep going, We have this here. This is, well, they call it the magical wishing well, but in truth, it's magical water. This water can speak. It can grant you essentially any wish, but I actually, can it grant you a wish? All I really know about it is that it can speak and that it can cause like transfiguration. It can change things. And well, I would say it can do more because I feel like it can. People, historically at least, could ask it wishes and give it a coin. So theoretically, I imagine you could ask it a wish. And in that way, I'm going to leave it here in overpowered. But if it was just transfiguration, maybe it would go up to like neat party trick or something. But right now, that's where it lands. The next one is this. It's a picture of Virginia and Tony. Oh, no, it's a picture of Virginia and Wolf. Oh my God. But this is Kissing Town, and we're going to get into Kissing Town later. But to keep this brief, when you are in Kissing Town, you are under the, I wouldn't call it a thrall, you're under the influence of romance. I don't know how obvious or evident it is in universe, but there are flower petals that float around and make you feel romantic. There's romantic music that I fully assume is playing within the universe. And then at one point even you see the moon turn into a heart. So there's lots of romantic influences that are happening that make someone, feel in the mood to kiss or to marry. And as whimsical as that is, I think that is questionable and annoying. Simply for the fact that, like, what if I just needed to make a commute through Kissing Town and I just happened to, like, get swayed in a certain direction, regardless of whether I wanted to or not. Like, I have to pull over and I have to kiss, like, someone on the side of the road. I don't know how it works, but it's just, I don't trust it. And also it feels a little bit, it feels morally questionable, but I'll leave that for later. Then the next subcategory we have, or the next two, this is the dead. So people who can contact you from the dead. This one's pretty ugly. This is the old Evil Queen, not the new one, not the one that we're concerned about now. This is the one from the original Snow White fairy tale. She is just, she is bones. She's just bones. And she can occasionally communicate with anybody who is near her. And I think this is bad because she just stays bones. At one point, she's talking to a character and you can see her jaw moving a little bit, but she's just dead. Like, I hate the idea of just being stuck on your dead body. Ew. So this is just bad. This is just gross. Like, miserable. She's like stuck in her, like, her little basement all day or all for the rest of her, like, eternity until she just turns to dust. The other version of this is Snow White. She is also just like a cadaver, but she is preserved under ice. And instead of being stuck under there, she can sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? She can astral project out of her ice, and she can just like be a person for a little bit. But it doesn't seem like she leaves her cave. She does have magic that influences outside of the cave, but she never leaves it. So it still sucks, like, even though she's like a normal looking person that can walk around and talk. So I'd put this in questionable and annoying. It is a marked improvement from being like skin and bones, but yeah, not much better. The next two are their own little category. These are Snow White. The first one, this Snow White, she can essentially grant wishes now. She has assumed the role of a pseudo fairy godmother, so she can grant a wish. I mean, immediately this goes into overpowered. She only gives wishes, I'm assuming, to good-hearted people, but still, like most people, I would say, or most heroes in stories, I would say, are good. Like, I'm good. I could get a wish. So naturally that falls into the overpowered category, especially for the fact that, someone flubs a wish. And essentially that person gets two wishes by adding an and in her wish. Oh, well, there we go. I kind of spoiled it. Anyway, you could theoretically get multiple wishes out of one wish. Oh, goodness. The second one here for Snow White is her veil magic. So what she does is she can block the image of Virginia and Tony from the Queen. So I left a note in my document that this is essentially like magical VPN. So this is really handy. Like, just straight off the bat, this is really handy. I would love to have that. I don't want people watching me, observing me. I want to have my privacy. I will say that does have the drawback of the only reason the queen becomes suspicious of Virginia is the fact that she has veil magic over her in the first place. Like, I'm assuming she'd see her through Wolf if Snow White didn't intervene, the queen would, but maybe not be as concerned. So it does sort of raise a red flag for the evil queen. Then we have the last 4 pieces of magic. This one is probably the most iconic, I would say, in the series, along with this fish guy over here. This is the magical singing ring. The first thing I'll say is there are 2 tiers of magical singing rings. The first one is just plainly not as good. It's lesser than. They're very desperate. They don't have faces. They don't sing. They just bounce, and they ask you to pick them. And obviously, like, I'm not going to pick a ring that it's like, pick me, pick me. Like, I'm not going to pick a pick me ring. But that doesn't make this one any better. So this one is a face. Well, I was going to say faceful, but this one has a face. This one sings. I don't think it just plainly talks.
How I long to linger on your sweetheart's finger.
It is a singing ring, sir.
Puff, puff.
And this is going to be divisive. Like, this is probably going to be the most divisive part of this video because I know people like the ring, all right? It is, in a way, cute. But I hate it. I hate the little rhymes. I'm sorry, I'm coming out as a ring hater. I mean, I do get them stuck in my head on occasion, but I cannot imagine wearing this ring. Can you imagine just going about your day, like trying to make dinner or do errands or just do stuff at work, and then this ring is just prattling on, like doing couplets? At least come up with like a better rhyme, right? There is another part of this ring. So the guy who sells it essentially says that whoever you offer this ring to, they can't help it, say yes. I mean, that is proven to be wrong, but also in a way correct. I don't believe in that part of the magic, but really, like, how much more magic do you need to add on to this thing? How many more ways do you need to sell this to a person? It just seems desperate. So, just bad. Yes, I'm saying this little ring is equally as bad as the evil witch. The next one is this, well, it's more than just this mushroom. This guy and a crowd of other mushrooms exactly like him live in a bog in the disenchanted forest. When you first hear these guys, they are singing a chorus of Procol Harum's A Wider Shade of Pale. Shout out to Procol Harum. This really put the song on the map for me, and I love it. This kind of magic is more than just the mushrooms. In addition to the mushrooms actually talking, you can also eat the mushrooms. And the mushrooms, partnered up with the bog water, can cause you to hallucinate. You get like a marijuana-like high. They cause drowsiness. They make you fall asleep. They can bring about nightmares. And when you fall asleep and when you're in that really deep sleep state, vines essentially wrap around you and pull you down. Yeah, it's actually a predatory bog. So this mushroom and everything that it represents is bad. However, if I had to find a way of going out, I mean, who doesn't love a high? I would say questionable. Like, this is a positive questionable, because even though it causes nightmares, I feel like this is a better way to go out than most. So that goes there. To focus on to the last 2, this is a picture of Virginia. She has this very vague and it's never focused on, this sort of intuitive magic. She can sense where the queen has been physically. Like, there are 3 occasions across the story where she's like, the queen's been in this room. And it's never explained. She never remarks upon it beyond simply like doing this expression and putting her hand on her head. But ultimately, like, this is useless. Like, if I had this magic and it was focused on like a specific kind of person or a specific person, it's not going to help me. It's really not. So, I don't really enjoy it. The last one, and very small kind of magic, is this flower. It's essentially first a shriveled up old flower that's dead, but through just random magical circumstances, it does bloom back to life. And I find this to be this is the definition of a neat party trick. I almost wanted to put it into I would like to see it, but I find this to be neat because, I kind of want it, because then I had to think about this. I kind of want it because then I can get like a bouquet of flowers and I never have to buy a bouquet of flowers again. I can just let them rebloom. I can figure out what specifically causes the magic to happen or unfold. So that is our tier list. Wow, that was longer than I thought, but I really enjoyed it. You truly probably realize just how much I say things. I probably say literally a lot. I probably stumble a lot, but that's just the kind of person I am. Luckily, we are returning to our regularly scheduled programming after this, so I hope you enjoyed this section of the video. Moving on to point number 4, all the big bads. I really just wanted to spotlight them and give them their flowers before moving on to the rest of the video. Let's start with the trolls. The Troll King is arguably the most boring antagonist the heroes have to face, and that's saying something because the way he's just really cruel and nasty is still kind of fun to watch, and the more I think about it, I'm pretty sure the heroes never actually have to face him. The Troll King essentially sells out his children to the Queen, yes, and the children are a nuisance to Virginia and her crew, but the Troll King serves an entirely different purpose in the story. So he lets the Queen out of her prison cell, right? They make a tentative alliance to keep the circumstances of the Queen's escape secret, aka the whole Dog Prince thing, so she can take over the Fourth Kingdom. For helping her escape, as well as the use of his kids, she tells the Troll King she'll give him half of the Fourth Kingdom, just not the half at the castle. But the Troll King is impatient, and as we obviously know, the Troll children fail to find and kill Prince Wendell, much less capture him, so there's some rising ill will between both parties. In addition to that, in order for the fake Dog Prince to take the throne during his coronation, the Queen herself must train him to stop acting like a dog entirely. I'd say those scenes are some of the weakest in the series because the plights of this poor dog turned into a man are very sad, and they use a little bit of gross humor, which I'm not a fan of. At one point you see him lift his leg to pee against a pillar, and then you see the pee on the ground as if that wasn't enough. And then there's another even more dramatic scene with the poor dog when he's so tired of behaving like a human that he threatens to hang himself in front of the Queen. The dog's hanging attempt is laughably foiled, but it leaves a sour taste in my mouth. Maybe that's the point, but it takes all the whimsy out of what could have been an interesting half of the story. Anyway, the training of the new prince is taking far too long for the Troll King's liking, so in the meantime, instead of laying low and letting the Queen enact her plan, he uselessly starts pillaging and terrorizing some of the outer provinces, such as Beantown. He does this because he knows the real prince is incapacitated, and let's just say this sets up a big hurdle for the Queen to face. In many ways, the Troll King is an antagonist and a substantial distraction for her and not Virginia. She has to be doing something interesting before the climax of the series, after all, and this makes enough sense. Then there are the Troll Children, and honestly, I really love these guys. They're the comedic release of the series, which is saying something because it's not exactly a super tense series the whole way through. There are plenty of other light and funny moments. Blabberwort, Burly, and Bluebell are basically bumbling idiots throughout the entire series, and on rare occasion, whenever the characters get too comfortable, the Troll Children will pop up and terrify them and spur them on to the next big set piece. The only criticism I have for the Trolls is that 1, they're the ones who name New York City the 10th Kingdom, and they make some feeble attempts to maybe raid the 10th Kingdom with a troll army, I guess, but by the end of the series, that motivation's been completely nuked. The other is that there is no conclusion for the Trolls. I feel comfortable saying that because the final conflict between the Trolls and our heroes is a very simple fight before the climax, and they lose and are knocked out, and that's the last time we see or hear from them ever again. Which I understand on some level because they were just entertaining time filler, but in a series that otherwise feels very tightly knit, they're a loose thread in my opinion. The last enemy I'll talk about is essentially a weapon working under the Queen. Unlike Wolf, who the Queen tries to vest control over, the Huntsman works willingly. Where the Trolls have some levity to them and their threat is downplayed significantly, the Huntsman represents a very legitimate moral threat against our main characters. We learn of him in part 3, and I'd say I really like his entrance because he's an important figure between the Queen and Virginia. Virginia is often made parallel to Snow White through her behavior, and like the original story, Virginia at one point faces the Huntsman individually. The Huntsman serves as the perfect middleman from the Snow White fairy tale. In that story, at least the Disney iteration, we know the Huntsman to serve the evil Queen, and she sends him out to kill Snow White because she's the fairest of them all. But as he raises his axe over her, he falters and instead lets her flee into the forest, keeping it a secret from the Queen. The interesting difference with this Huntsman, however, is that he's become disillusioned, and it's made fairly obvious when Virginia first meets him that he's not one to turn over a new leaf. A large theme in the world of the Nine Kingdoms is that understanding we are 200 years out from those iconic fairy tales, the world has sobered up. Wolf at one point even says that happily ever after didn't last as long as we'd hoped, and the huntsman represents the downward descent of their world into villainy. We talked about it briefly in the tier list, but the huntsman possesses the magical crossbow, which, when fired, cannot stop until it hits the heart of a living being. Don't ask me how the logic works, but when the huntsman was still a normal dude cutting trees in the forest, the evil queen comes by and offers him this crossbow, but only if he shoots it in a direction he chooses. He takes that offer, takes position, and shoots the arrow. The thing is, the arrow hits his son, presumably hundreds of yards away, and kills him instantly. When the axeman pulls the arrow from his son's chest, somehow that confirms that he is now the queen's personal huntsman, and he accepts the role willingly. End of story. Don't ask me how that works, it obviously sounds like backwards logic to me, but in the same breath, I kinda like how backward it is, because it reminds me of those old fairy tales where characters make very bad but very symbolic decisions. Fairy tales historically aren't inherently moralistic stories because we know that they weren't initially targeted towards children, much less teaching them a lesson, but obviously with newer iterations and the shifting of the fairy tale paradigm into our modern day understanding, leaving out a moral is virtually impossible. Heroes now make rational decisions because they represent models of good character, which children are meant to aspire to. But the Huntsman's Tale, despite how briefly it enters the story, represents some of those more ambiguous stories without a proper lesson. The Huntsman's story is about destiny, sure, but a kind of destiny that's incomprehensible to our main characters because he isn't following human logic. He's following the contrary conventions of the oral tale. When Virginia hears that story, she calls him crazy because she doesn't understand it.
You're crazy. Everybody in this whole place is crazy!
And that's all I have on him. So moving on, finally, there is the Queen. She is the main antagonist of the series, and as things develop, she becomes Virginia's opposite, even though they don't meet until that finale. And here's where I have a major spoiler for the final chapter of the series, which you may have already guessed if you watched the movies up to this point, but I don't know. I just recommend pausing for a while here if you're still watching them. In light of telling the story's big twist, I think this is a good time as any to say that I'm going to analyze some of Virginia's and Wolf's big character arcs later down the line. This means character conflicts, story beats, and the conclusion at the end of the series, all of which are major spoilers. So here is a space to, like, quit for now. I'm not going to be insulted. Are we all on board for spoilers now? Good. Thumbs up, whatever that is. Alright, so the grand reveal we get near the end of part 4 is that the Queen, who we've only vaguely known as the Queen, is Virginia's long-lost mother. I know, right? Crazy. It was impossible to really talk about the Queen because if we're looking at her origins, it's directly tied to her history in New York. In the first wave of being enlightened in part 5, we understand the Queen, who once went by Christine, fled her home for unknown reasons. Virginia doesn't know why she left, and Tony hasn't said anything, but she's fled in distress to Central Park. From what I can glean, she had some sort of emotional break, but I don't really feel comfortable assigning any other kind of mentality to her. It just doesn't seem appropriate. We just know she's not well in the head right now. Or ever. So as she's fleeing in distress, she receives a call from a distant voice, an elderly woman's voice, and suddenly we're seeing a floating amorphous portal with an old hag on the other side coaxing her in. This is the original witch, the original stepmother to Snow White herself. In the Nine Kingdoms, the iteration of the story they go with is that Snow White wins out against the Queen and she marries the king and they live happily ever after. But the evil queen, as punishment, was forced to wear white-hot iron slippers on Snow White's wedding day and dance for them. Yep, dance. I find this interesting because when Virginia is first captured by the Troll's children in part 2, before Wolf saves her, they prepare the same kind of white-hot slippers to torture her in. In terms of parallels, this is interesting given that Virginia is parallel to Snow White and not her mother. Maybe it's a retrospective comment on lineage and shared traits, or maybe it's just a clever way for the writers to insert this imagery much earlier into the story. Whatever the case, after dancing for Snow White, the Queen is able to drag herself out to a bog, and she calls upon Christine from the other dimension to pick up the mantle of being evil. The old queen essentially teaches the new queen all of her evil magics and bestows all her magic mirrors upon her in the hopes that Christine will destroy the House of White in revenge, hence the later killing of Wendell's parents. In the grand scheme of things, this coincidence of lineage entering the Nine Kingdoms must be fate, right? Everything that occurs happens because destiny calls for it. I do like the idea of destiny in this story, as it sort of validates the truth that Virginia has something to offer the world around her, lifting her out of the mediocrity she feels relegated to. We'll get to that comment later. But it also feels restricting in that same way in how it takes away one's personal choice, in the idea of miraculous circumstances taking place due to the whimsy of the story rather than it being ordained by fate. I want Virginia to feel like she has something to offer the world, not because of a magically enforced coincidence, but because she takes the world by storm. Back to the queen, after the issue with the Troll King has been resolved, and she's able to focus more on the dog-turned prince, I do start to wonder why exactly she turns her sights on Virginia's crowd. She's never able to see Virginia or Tony through her spying mirrors because Snow White has placed a magical veil over both of them. What we do know is she becomes informed of these two through the Huntsman, who previously captured and then lost Virginia, and through Wolf, who never so much as claims Virginia is out to stop the queen. In fact, the queen is barely on the team's radar for the first half of the series, if not longer. The only reason the queen and Virginia are even forced to be in proximity to one another is because Virginia learns Christine has one of the traveling mirrors which can lead her back home. At some point along the way, Christine just designates Virginia as a threat without much explanation or reasoning. I think as an audience member, we can rationally assume that Christine has gained some sort of foresight on Virginia without knowing the details. She learned of Snow White's veil magic and assumes this strange girl must be a key threat to her. She just doesn't know how or why yet. Near the end of the story, the troll children do in fact capture Wendell, the dog, and bring him to the queen, but at that point she's just like, I don't need this guy anymore. I need that girl and I need her dead. And it's like, do you even know why yet? Beyond that, there are some traumatic experiences which unfold between Christine and Virginia, both from the past and in the present, but I'll get to those in a moment. In light of nearing some of my more thorough analyses on Virginia and Wolf, I want to make a pit stop at point number 5. The 10th Kingdom, out of context. Instead of just describing all of the random bits and quotes that I love to you, I put together this compilation for you guys to enjoy and perhaps convince you to watch the show, so please enjoy.
Look at all those lights.
They must go through a ton of candles.
I have a jug of margarita, a Diet Cola, and 2 beers, okay?
And my wife will have... Walk the catwalk. But you don't understand. I will be here next week.
You're not going to intimidate me with suicide steps.
Okay. Oh, my God. I can't eat that. It tastes like an old mattress.
No, it doesn't. Old mattress has a sweaty, meaty taste.
Breaking the cycle. Heal yourself in 7 days. Stop blaming yourself, please. And help for the bedwetting child, which I picked up by mistake, but I've got them all!
Did you put your finger on that fish?
A blind woodsman?
Have you ever seen a tree move?
If my door wasn't locked,
Yeah.
I'd be scared you'd come into my house and huff and puff and blow all my clothes off.
He's suffering from post-menstrual tension, Your Honor.
Interested? Whatever it is. Well, I have money.
We only serve cocktails, sir. Cupid's first blush, some enchanted evening, a long, slow spell against the wall.
He'll have her on her back before you can say happy ever after.
You haven't heard the awful news then?
We haven't heard anything. We've been gold.
There was a lovely little girl who lived on the edge of the forest. Her mommy told her never to go into the forest. But do you know what she did?
No.
Yes, you do. She went into the forest and she met a monster. And then she died.
Hey, come on, I'm not gonna sit here in the dark. Turn these lights on.
Get your hands off me.
What does that achieve?
What are you doing?
I mean, what is the purpose of your life? Just to be a pain?
Don't touch me there. Only my girlfriend touches me there.
That was nice, wasn't it? So, moving on to point number 6, a return to our main characters. We're nearing the end of the video, and now that we've gotten past the point where I had to skirt around the spoilers, I really want to dive into who Virginia is and who Wolf is. I don't think I properly gave them their dues when introducing the series, and that's because you can only say so much without giving everything away. To start slightly smaller, I want to give focus to Wolf, who uniquely straddles the line between good and, well, it's difficult to call him bad, because even at the one point where you think he may make a downward descent into being bad, it's never because he actively wants to become evil. On all other accounts, Wolf is just some guy who just happens to be tagging along with the gang because he wants to. As I described previously in the video, Wolf's motivation in the series isn't to find the mirror and help Virginia home. Rather, his ultimate desire is to make Virginia realize he's the one for her, and make her see that she loves him. Wolf begins the series in this manic state, so when he first encounters Virginia, he's very wild, and he confuses his attraction for her with his desire to capture prey. He's mostly just hungry in every sense of the word. He wants to be sated and comforted and to feel full, both with food and with love. It's only after he's been out of jail for a while and he's able to loose all this manic energy that he starts to think more rationally. It's here that you may wonder, as an audience member, is Wolf going to forget about his infatuation with Virginia and do something more in line with the Queen's will? After all, she was the reason he'd been released. He effectively owes a magical debt to her, and in the meantime, he has to pay the price of that debt by getting harassed by the Queen as her face shows up in the moon or sticks out of a water trough. It's weird. But no, he doesn't abandon Virginia. And I think what's so bizarre and interesting about Wolf is that once he sets his sight on Virginia, even while he's trying to eat her grandma, he recognizes something real and powerful within himself: love. Wolves in the Nine Kingdom have an innate sensitivity. Mostly this is just to make them aware of scents nearby or when someone's feeling a certain way, but I think it also gives them a very powerful sense of intuition to trust in one's own instincts and their aspiring will. In effect, this makes Wolf the master of his own emotions, even if they're a bit wild. But we also learned that Wolf has never been in love before. It seems like that's the norm for people of Wolf kind, that once they meet their first lover, that's it for them. They become mates for life and live happily ever after, or as he describes at one point, they die of terrible causes. The thing is, with Wolf, he lays all his feelings out on the table, even when those feelings aren't fully developed. It allows for honest and open communication, like when you're excited after a first date and can't help but text the other person like 5 times in a row. Wolf sees what he wants and he isn't afraid of revealing that fact, even if it makes him vulnerable, and he shrugs at what other people might feel ashamed in admitting so plainly.
I need to know if your intentions are honorable.
No, not really.
No!
While this may be called honesty, I'd also call it naivety, which may partially be because he's never connected to a girl like this before. And this holds fairly strong repercussions for Wolf and Virginia down the line when these emotions become more serious and Wolf receives the first sign of mutual affection. So let's enter the story around the time our heroes enter Kissing Town. By this time, Wolf and Virginia have bonded platonically together on various occasions, and Virginia has allowed herself to trust Wolf. Wolf, on the other hand, is continuing to express his desires for Virginia romantically, but this behavior slowly becomes more restrained as they travel along. I would say entering Kissing Town is something of an unfair advantage for Wolf when it comes to his and Virginia's budding relationship. Kissing Town seems to pump this aphrodisiac of love through the air to all of its citizens and tourists, and what we know is that no two people can start falling for each other in this town unless seeds of romance are already in place. But I'd say that visiting Kissing Town runs the risk of advancing affections way too quickly. In a way, as a viewer, I'm a bit uncomfortable at the idea that I could swoon under circumstances I wouldn't usually swoon. So I want to say, yes, the way Virginia is treating Wolf is genuine, but her responses and affections seem provoked in a way that, in retrospect, makes me side-eye the entire town. I also want to give Wolf the benefit of the doubt because while he leans into these exaggerating emotions, I don't think he's pushing Virginia along intentionally. This is just the way their world works, and both of them are aware of the magic in the air, so they effectively consent. But when Wolf can see a potentially romantic happily ever after on the horizon, things start going awry. So let's back up again. Virginia's big goal in this series is to get home no matter what. Wolf's, however, is that he simply wants to win the girl of his dreams. Previous to this section of the plot, their motivations coincide because Wolf can simply assist Virginia in her plans. Consider also, there's this running gag during their travels that Wolf is reading a seemingly endless pile of self-help books he stole from a book fair in New York City, all which focus on self-improvement and winning the girl of his dreams. Their entrance into Kissing Town perfectly coincides with Wolf reading the last page of the last book, and with their guidance he feels equipped to moderate himself and rein in this off-putting carnal behavior to become a better man. Previously, he's uselessly openly pined for Virginia, but there hasn't been much emotional heft or maturity to it, so Virginia ignores it or looks past it. But finishing that last book propels Wolf into finally stepping up and making a move on Virginia, and this is where their motivations noticeably begin to split. In short, the rift plays out in very ugly fashion once Virginia realizes Wolf is acting selfishly. Let's bring in some context to set the scene. The reason they are in Kissing Town in the first place is to obtain their magic mirror. However, its magic is discovered while it's being stored at an auction house, and the mirror is appraised at 5,000 Wendels, which is the currency in the Fourth Kingdom. And that's way too expensive for them. In an effort to make up that money before the auction, the team divides their measly 30 Wendels amongst the 3 humans, and they split up at a casino, aiming to hit it big. Tony and Virginia separately fail, but Wolf ends up winning 10,000 gold Wendels while no one is watching. Instead of giving Virginia this money or even telling her about it, he dreams up a plan to woo her and convince Virginia to marry him. Following through with that plan entails spending a ludicrous amount of money on a carriage ride, a luxurious 9-course meal, and an anthropomorphized engagement ring that speaks in rhyme. It took me like 3 tries to say that word. This also leaves him with nothing to spend on the auction. What you can evidently observe of Wolf's behavior is that he fails to take into account the reality of who Virginia really is, and instead prioritizes the idea of loving her and living happily ever after together, rather than the reality of what she wants and values, to get home.
We could have gone home! Don't you understand? I don't belong here! I want to go home!
No, you don't want to go home. I have lots of things planned. I have, there's a gondola out back and there's fireworks and more fizzy stuff.
You don't care about me, you just care about yourself!
Self-help books and written advice can, of course, teach us how to improve ourselves, genuinely. But in Wolf's case, many of these books are laughably superficial and lack substance compared to real human connection. Devouring a book called How to Marry the Girl of Your Dreams isn't going to help when Virginia's first goal isn't to fall in love. So while he may be learning to hold in his panting tongue and act like a trained pup, he isn't considering either person involved, not Virginia's wants and needs, nor the person inside himself, who needs to grow up a little rather than curb a few surface-level mannerisms. In a situation such as this, Wolf's understanding of love is portrayed as sickly sweet, idyllic. Their arrival in Kissing Town, where gentle music is playing and heart-shaped fireworks shoot off, bolster this idea, and it's no coincidence. Wolf's definition of love is confronted as false when his actions betray Virginia entirely, revealing it as superficial, hollow, and more than anything else, selfish. He may love Virginia, but more than that, he childishly loves the idea of being in love, and that ultimately leads him to not having Virginia at all. They lose the auction, they lose the mirror, and Wolf wasted their one chance of getting home. So they break up and they split ways. This is when he looks in a mirror and the queen tempts him to join the dark side, and he tearfully, silently accepts. So let's put a pin in Wolf for a second and shift our discussion to Virginia. The problem Virginia faces on a character level works twofold within the overarching narrative. First, she's complacent in her personal world. She feels stuck, permanently relegated to mediocrity, destined to live a boring life. As we remember, she lives with her dad in a rundown apartment and works as a waitress. As far as we know, she has no professional or romantic prospects, and what we do see is that she faces her world with a concerningly ambivalent disposition. It leaves her no room to grow, only to dwell on what she already has and has lost. Expanding on this, Virginia has some compelling narration lines in part 1 before Prince runs into her.
I guess you get to a certain age and you realize that nothing exciting is ever going to happen to you. And maybe that's just the way it is. You know, maybe some people just have quiet lives.
It's kind of sad. The second half of that fold is Virginia is also angry at her world for being this way, and angry about the circumstances that led her here allegedly. The loss of her mother affecting her potential, and the ineptitude of her father making her feel stuck in place. In effect, Virginia feels a loss of power, or more accurately, a complete lack of agency, and she blames it on everyone without attempting to make change. Whether that judgment is fair or accurate gets confronted in the story itself, but this is where she begins. Virginia feels the circumstances of her world are out of her control because they are not perfect, so she effectively resigns herself to leading this boring life to spare herself from the possibility of trying her hardest and experiencing failure, heartbreak, or loss. Later in Kissing Town, when she starts falling for Wolf, Virginia even admits to him this exact sentiment before kissing him, which just goes to show how much effort she put into letting down her emotional walls. This ties in especially well with a line from Wolf in part 3, where we see how a full moon dramatically affects his disposition, making him mean and at certain points brutally honest.
You know everything. Your little Miss Perfect sticks up her hand and can answer every question, but knows nothing. You're pretending to live, Virginia. You're doing everything but actually living.
Lastly, and I'd say the first time this anger is revealed in the story, comes in part 2, when Virginia is having her fortune told by an enchantress, and the enchantress plainly states Virginia never forgave her mother for leaving them. At that point, it was shocking to the viewer because up until then, we mostly understood Virginia to be this meek character who shies away from the harsh reality of a progressing world so she can relegate herself to mediocrity and avoid the risk of trying her damnedest. In many ways, the Nine Kingdoms is just an active, lived world confrontation of her own mental baggage. To continue that thought, in a larger sense, we can consider Virginia's goal throughout the story to get home is in large part motivated by her need to return to that boring world, to try less again, to be unchallenged. We can safely say that this anger is a plot point which survives into the end of the series, but the complacency and lack of agency is arguably confronted earlier in part 3, not long after Wolf angrily yells at her that she isn't living. I won't dive too much into this section because it involves a very good mystery I don't want to spoil, but at one point, in order to obtain the mirror, Virginia has to dress up like a shepherdess in order to win a shepherdess competition. Virginia initially protests and wants to say no to the idea, but knows she has to take extreme action to reach her goal. Instead of employing shady tactics like stealing the mirror under everyone's noses, Virginia finally, confidently leans into her world's fantastical circumstances. She approaches the competition in full shepherdess regalia and faces her opponents with a head held high. I think this hurdle she faces is truly overcome when she sings a farm animal rendition of Queen's We Will Rock You, creatively retitled We Will Shear You, which, for copyright reasons, I have to leave out entirely, and I'll leave that whole half of the arc there of complacency. The other half, this anger, which we know is primarily aimed at her mother, is really only confronted in the final act of the story when Virginia must be in proximity of Christine. For context, Virginia, Tony, and Wendell are trying to locate a new traveling mirror and learn that it resides in the Palace of White, which, coincidentally, is the same place the Queen is currently staying. Previously, the Queen has been hiding in the Dog Prince's coattails as he prepares for his coronation, and he's just recently arrived at the castle after a long disappearance. But where did they learn this information, you might ask? Well, Virginia learned it from Snow White, like actual Snow White, which the story has confirmed to be dead for quite a while. To spare you the details, Virginia, without the presence of her father, encounters Snow White's final resting place, which is a snowy cave deep in the underground of the Ninth Kingdom. Snow White appears out of a flurry of white to help impart some wisdom and assistance to Virginia on her journey. Snow White really is the bad bitch that calls out Virginia on all the shit she has been repressing since her childhood. Snow White reveals that she, in her new role as pseudo-fairy godmother, has been the one to veil the queen from the image of Virginia and Tony. But Snow White warns Virginia that now is the time to see and be seen. This is calling back the dregs of Virginia's complacency and lack of agency in the world, and it's obvious that despite her evident growth within the story, idealistically, she's still clutching onto her old ways, hoping uselessly that the status quo can return once she reaches New York. But Snow White effectively says that is impossible. And here's where Snow White imparts her own story, her very own fairy tale and the embedded moral therein to Virginia. She describes being antagonized by the queen, nearly killed by the huntsman, and soon protected and cared for by the 7 dwarves. Then there's the part where the wicked queen attempts to visit and kill her, which I really don't think I can paraphrase well without losing some of the gravity of the story, so I'll play as much of the excerpt as I can here.
But the last time she came, she brought the most beautiful basket of apples that I ever saw. And this time she stayed to watch me die. And I often think, why did I let her in? Didn't I know she was bad? I did. Of course I did. But I also knew that I couldn't keep the door closed all my life. Just because it was dangerous. Just because there was a chance that I might get hurt.
The way I respond to Snow White's version of the fairy tale is complex. My first response, because I like to put faith in the good intentions of the screenwriters, is that I really like it. This does apply to Virginia's narrative in a very integral way. Again, Virginia's problem is that she thinks she's stuck in mediocrity, and she's fearful of what could happen if she tried to live life fully and failed at it. In that respect, Virginia's personal growth is largely about taking charge of one's own story and taking those risks for the betterment of oneself. Moving past complacency, for better or for worse. In this way, Snow White's advice is really moving because it's general life advice. But more practically speaking, within the series' overarching narrative, it's only at the end of part 4 that we truly see how Virginia's character development will be put to the test. When Virginia, Tony, and Wendell escape the Ninth Kingdom's mines, Virginia learns that the evil queen at large is her mother, the one who ran out on her family when Virginia was 7 years old. So thinking back now, when watching Snow White's scene for the first time, the lesson for Virginia in the caves understandably wouldn't or shouldn't be perceived as literal guidance. It exists more as an allegory which Virginia could potentially apply to her character and gradually learn from. But now it's become a very one-to-one narrative between the evil queen and daughter, and at that point you really have to turn back to Snow White and interrogate her story less as a floating moral and perhaps partially as a piece of concrete instruction. In that sense, Snow White's direct advice to Virginia is that she needs to face someone who once abused her, controlled her, and ultimately neglected her. Virginia doesn't remember that she was a victim of abuse because she's repressed those memories, but Snow White, being a magic fairy godmother, likely possesses some knowledge of Virginia and the Queen's past. She's advocating for Virginia to risk her health and safety and her mentality, and even in a magical universe with fantastical circumstances, that doesn't sit right with me. So sure, face your metaphorical demons, learn about yourself from intense self-reflection, and grab life by the horns. But my second response is that maybe this is completely out of pocket. Snow White fully died, at least temporarily, in her retelling of the fairy tale. So what are the moral implications in advising Virginia to allow the same or similar to happen to her? Previous to this, I haven't really touched on this reveal of abuse either because I felt it was a touch early, but we have talked about how Christine ran out to Central Park in a flashback, in distress and clearly having some kind of emotional break. And that's because just prior to this, Christine is seen giving Virginia a bath while Tony is at work. Virginia is stated to only be 7 in this scene. The water appears to be near boiling, and when she's in the bath, Christine ends up trying to drown Virginia. The only reason Virginia even survived is because Tony came home and caught Christine in the act, and presumably feeling ashamed and erratic, Christine flees. Obviously, there is no excuse for this violence, but we never properly get an explanation for what provoked this behavior in Christine in the first place. At the end of the day, I get it. That detail isn't important. What's important is Virginia and how this affected her life moving forward. but it still leaves me with a lot of questions. This abuse turns out to be a reveal to Virginia because she repressed the memory, so all she's left with is both admiration and unplaced anger for her mother. Now, Snow White has given Virginia a small hand mirror to ask a single question, and to answer, the mirror reveals the face of the queen, Christine, who senses someone is watching her. This is what spurs on this recollection of resentment and childhood trauma. Tony can't hold off the truth from Virginia because they need to get to the bottom of this. And honestly, up to this point, yes, this series is iconic for me because of its world building, its magic, its comedy, and its characters. But seemingly out of nowhere, as a culmination of all these more serious scenes, we get a genuinely compelling monologue from Virginia, where she finally opens the floodgates.
Well, I knew she'd come back because she'd left all her clothes, you know? And she loved her clothes more than anything in the world. And I kept going into her room and checking on them. And then after a few months, you suddenly said that we had to get rid of them all, so I remember folding them all very neatly, and I kept hoping that there was going to be a secret note or something that would be written for me, just to me, telling me that she loved me and explaining the secret magical reason why she had to go, And I miss her. And I hate her. And I miss her. And I feel like I was on a train and it crashed or something and no one came and rescued me.
I think the power and value of this scene extends far past the confines of the magical world the story itself works within. When I previously heard Tony describing the younger Virginia only wanted to hear the good things about her mother, I think, oh, that sounds like naive behavior, and it seems to contradict all the anger that we heard about previously. But this monologue from Virginia really lays out all of her feelings in a complex, human way. The thing is, real human emotion is often complex and contradictory, and in that way can feel incomprehensible to a person, and the feelings themselves often feel irreconcilable within oneself. How are you supposed to feel when a person who was supposed to love and care for you more than anyone else in the world up and leaves without reason? How do you negotiate feeling hatred for a person who you so desperately want love and validation and connection from? One of the strongest lines in this monologue, I think, is that simple repetition of, I miss her, and I hate her, and I miss her. These feelings work in tandem, and this brief mantra actually reveals the fact that what Virginia is feeling isn't incomprehensible or irreconcilable. She hates her because she misses her, and what's left behind is scorn and scars which affect how Virginia approaches the world. You can only really feel loss and betrayal and hurt when it's about someone that really means something to you, and having to learn that lesson in such a concrete way might make you never put your trust in another person ever again. The possibility of feeling that same hurt is worse than just living your life without passion or genuine connection. So I get why Virginia acts the way she does. And as a viewer, I'm able to rationally and empathetically reconcile how someone can come across as meek and hopeful, while also coming across as disillusioned to the world and resentful of the people in it. It's not a reveal or a twist in the traditional sense, but Part 5 of the story really gives you the catharsis necessary to understand and connect to the characters. Being honest here, if you've ever come from a broken home or struggled from a sense of abandonment, following Virginia's story and being hit with this surprisingly honest narrative really helps to put into perspective one's own emotions. And I'm really grateful to the series. I'd say it's one of the main reasons I keep it close to my heart. After this point, all we really have left is our team's travel to the Palace of White, where the coronation is set to happen on the same evening they plan to enter the building and use the mirror, sort of like a cover. I'll keep the rest of Wolf's narrative vague simply because I can, but along the way to the castle, Virginia and Tony are saved by Wolf, and he rejoins their last leg of the journey. Yes, the last we saw, Wolf submitted to the Queen's will, and you can keep that in your back pocket if you want. But for all intents and purposes, Wolf is a good man. He's taken time to reflect, and he's matured, and he's there for Virginia in her time of need, supporting her because he loves her rather than thinking selfishly. Virginia still has an impending battle she must face, but just before the climax, the two truly make a proper reunion, and having learned a lot about herself with the help of Snow White, Virginia is ready to let go of her unnecessary precautions. The two of them are able to face each other as honest equals, and they consummate their relationship in the woods, in a bush. In moving on to the real finale of the series, I hesitate in addressing Virginia's actual confrontation with her mother. Virginia has effectively grown fully as a character, and mostly just needs closure on this relationship she came to resent so much. It's more interesting, I think, to take the perspective of Christine with the last few moments, because in finally seeing Virginia in front of her, her reactions range from cruelty to denial to, at least by the Queen's standards, a kind of empathy. In the first meeting, it's when our team of heroes is first caught on the palace grounds. At this point, the Queen has taken over the castle from the inside, having threatened the entire staff to silence and submission. So they're brought to the Queen pretty quickly, and Christine receives a flashback of Virginia upon seeing her, of bathing her as a child. She starts in a place of complete denial, thinking Virginia is using some strange magic to trick her memory. But it's interesting after that. Without even a visual indicator of revelation, once Virginia starts asking the Queen questions about their history, she immediately claims that past as her own, but twists it.
Why did you leave me?
You were unwanted. It's plain to see. Haven't you always known that? Secretly. That you were the ugly duckling? And the sad thing is, your little quest has given you delusions of grandeur. You've started to think you're capable of great things, but you were right in the first place. You're plain. Plain and ugly.
She makes herself out to be a proper one-note antagonist rather than the complex human person she really was and still is. She was a legitimately abusive and mentally unwell person, but in the same breath, there was a small part of Christine that probably really loved Virginia. I think that's the toughest part of the entire series to swallow, the way abuse and love are consistently interwoven. Instead of confronting that complexity, Christine uses their past as a weapon to separate herself even further from Virginia. Living in this world and becoming the evil queen effectively works as a mechanism for Christine to distance herself from the responsibility of her actions, from her humanity and the faults of being human. In many ways, Christine's disposition mirrors previous commentary I've observed about Faith from the Buffy series, who takes the route of evil as a means of repression and deflection. In that same scene, Christine deludes herself so greatly that she tries to kill Virginia, but when Virginia successfully defends herself, instead of properly going on the offensive, Virginia stays vulnerable. This is where Virginia's new lesson of trying your damnedest despite the possibility of failure really shines through. She asks her mother very simply, quote, "In your whole life, did you ever love me?" unquote, knowing that she could be hurt again, knowing that she could be rebuffed. This, in effect, triggers the flashback of a younger Christine running away in Central Park, and the memory really affects modern-day Christine.
Oh, that's not me! Oh!
She looks almost repentant, but the expression fades away when the huntsman approaches her and brings her back to fantasy. After that scene, and feeling conflicted enough, Christine doesn't kill her. Instead, she tells the huntsman to lock her up with Tony. That in itself is the empathy Christine shows, I think. It's the bare minimum, letting Virginia live, but it's nothing a truly evil queen would have allowed. I'll spare you the political conclusion to the story with Wendell, because I think it's fun, and also Wendell's story of personal growth is pretty simple, so I don't feel the need to explore it in depth. It's better to watch and feel thrilled than hear me dryly explain it away. But midway through that arc's conclusion, we do receive our final scene with Virginia and with the Queen. She and Tony have escaped from the prison cell, but yet again, Virginia is caught and brought to the Queen by the huntsman. Again, instead of opting to have Virginia killed, the Queen makes an uncharacteristically sympathetic decision and decides to let Virginia go, to go home.
Are you gonna kill me as well?
I was going to let you go. I don't know why.
You know why.
Go. Leave me. Get out while you can.
No.
You were nothing but an accident. You should have been killed at birth.
How dare you? How dare you speak to me like that?
I think that final slap really shows in practice how Virginia has taken to being an active participant in the world around her. She's able to express vulnerability, she has an emboldened sense of agency, and she's able to stand up against her abuser. Now, I'm going to spoil the last big plot twist of the series, so take that as a warning and pause now. That means you, Cheyenne, my friend Cheyenne, I know she's watching, and I'm not certain she's seen the series yet, so I'm talking directly to you here. After she slaps Christine, they get into a tussle and the queen tries to strangle Virginia, but do you remember that poisonous comb we briefly mentioned in the tier list? Christine is wearing that in her hair as a fascinator, and both women know that it's laced with a deadly poison. In order to, not die of asphyxiation? That's a word I cannot say. Die of Can I say it? Whoa, I can't. Not die of asphyxiation. Die of asphyxiation. In order to, not die of asphyxiation, Virginia takes the single opportunity available to her and grabs the comb out of her mother's hair and lightly scratches Christine on the cheek with it. But it's enough to do damage.
Don't cry. My little girl. My little girl. I gave away my soul.
Oh yeah, and not to disparage the scene, but I recently spotted the lace on this damn wig Christine is wearing, and oh my god, that is just, it's so obvious. Not to ruin the mood or anything, but yeah. So Virginia kills her own mother. The evil is dead, and Christine, in the last moment of her life, is able to be the woman she once was, or at least the good part of her, the loving part of her, no matter how small or tucked away it was. And that's all I really wanted to analyze in terms of the plot, so feel free to sit back, take a breather, and resonate in the emotional moment of the climax, because we're moving to the end pretty quickly now. So, point number 7, my ideas for a sequel. In the denouement of the series, we see Wolf and Virginia return to New York City to live out their life in peace. Tony, in the end, did not go with them because Wendell offered him a very integral role in his royal cabinet, so our two lovebirds are on their own. Here is the very last monologue we receive from Virginia.
My name is Virginia, and I live on the edge of the forest. And this is the end of the first book of the 10th Kingdom.
Did you hear that? Did you hear that little part about the first book of the 10th Kingdom? I know I did when I was like 7, and also when I was 12, and 15, and 22, and yesterday when I watched it again. Basically, anytime I ever watch the series in general. And every time, I hope that there was some sort of sequel in the works. But no, it never happens. However, if you look up Simon Moore, the creator and writer of the 10th Kingdom, and find his Angelfire site page, you can see he did have plans, or at least a plot synopsis, for a part 2 of the series. I assume it was stuck in development hell, or NBC and Hallmark never really gave it a shot. Apparently it was going to be called House of Wolves, and it was to take place in the kingdom of Little Red Riding Hood, the second kingdom. Wolf and Virginia are happily running a restaurant together in NYC, and they have a small wolf baby, and Virginia wants to place a charm or something on her baby to make it look human. I don't really know. Anyway, besides that, the Second Kingdom has intensive prejudices against wolves, which makes sense given the original fairy tale. And there is a school for young ladies, and Virginia and Wolf are set to get married under a full moon. There's a lot of working parts, and it all sounds very exciting, but without a proper plot breakdown from Moore, it just sounds like a big jumble right now. But I don't know, I have faith in the guy. I think the story he crafted the first time around is incredibly memorable, at least for me. That said, when I think about how much time has passed since the series originally launched, naturally much of the cast may not want to take part because they've moved on to other projects, and the cast that remains likely looks markedly older. And while they could recast the main characters and continue on with this story as is, I can't help but excitedly dwell on the alternatives. My fantasy sequel would be that we get the main cast back, the main 4, but given it's been 22 years since the premiere, we accept that 22 years have passed in universe rather than like a 6-month time skip. Maybe it's selfish, but I want to see what a fully grown adult raised by Virginia and Wolf looks like. To continue with this idea, maybe this son of theirs has never been able to visit the Nine Kingdoms since he was a child, and the entire family has effectively been cut off from the other dimension for unknown reasons. After all, the New York portal is amorphous and temporary, and is only available when engaged with on the opposite end. Before I move on to the rest of my idea, I did take notes throughout my original viewing of the series of loose threads or details that I find interesting and want to bring around for a sequel. 1. We know that 3 traveling mirrors of the same kind exist. The first was accidentally destroyed by Tony in Kissing Town, and the second one is now pristinely taken care of in the Palace of White. We learned through an anthropomorphic all-knowing mirror that a third traveling mirror exists in the world, but it's been long lost in the Great Northern Sea, sitting on a bed of barnacles. 2. The troll children are still alive. We don't know what happens to them, but last we see, they are knocked out by Tony in the basement of the palace. However, there's never any news that they've been apprehended, so we can safely assume they all escaped. We also learn on the Angelfire website from Simon Moore that they possibly have a new national anthem that is inspired by the Bee Gees song, so that sounds exciting to me. 3. When Virginia is talking with Snow White in the cave, Snow White says this very vague line, quote, "You will be a great advisor to other lost girls," unquote. So, who are those lost girls again? We don't know, it's never brought up. That could have been a throwaway line, I admit, but for our sake, that is sequel bait. 4. Prince Wendell pardons all wolves in the nation. And while this is nice, this mostly seems like a hollow gesture, and something that would be difficult for their nation of people to fully accept. Knowing now what Simon Moore's plans were for a sequel series, we can roughly say this is in line with his ideas. Finally, 5. Wendell hires Tony to single-handedly bring upon an industrial revolution in the Fourth Kingdom. I'm not exactly a super fan of steampunk, but what I can get behind is steampunk with a magical twist. All I know is that this would make this series look slightly different from the first, which is exciting. So if we're thinking back to our version of the sequel, I'm going to say that unbeknownst to Wolf, Virginia, and their unnamed son, let's just call him Andrew for simplicity's sake, let's say the second mirror that was pristinely kept by the Palace of White has been destroyed by unknown insurgents. Having been cut off from their world, Wolf, Virginia, and Andrew don't receive any communication for years on end. That is, until they receive a trans-dimensional message from Tony, who indicates he is in trouble and needs their help, but the message is fairly vague. At the same time, Central Park inexplicably floods with ocean water, and overlooking the scene from the now refurbished apartment Virginia once lived in with Tony, our family understands that something miraculous has occurred. The ocean portal has been opened. I'm not exactly a screenwriter, so I don't have a fully fleshed out idea on how they accomplish this yet, but I want them to travel through that portal and get shot out on the other end, finding themselves in the open ocean, trapped in the pulled-up fishing net of some swashbuckling pirate trolls, along with the barnacle mirror. Through hijinks, once they're collected on board, I want there to be a separation of Virginia from Wolf and their son. Maybe they negotiate their freedom so long as one person stays behind, and taking responsibility, Virginia volunteers herself, much to the others' dismay. In the aftermath, Wolf and Andrew are abandoned on the shores of the Second Kingdom, maybe in a port town. Through a series of events, we learn that the Second Kingdom has invaded the Fourth Kingdom and vested control of its palace. We know the Fourth Kingdom itself is very desirable land because of its strategic central location on their continent, so this isn't a complete shock to Wolf or Andrew, who has been filled in on the old politics. The rest of my plot is a lot more loosey-goosey. I want there to be a new character, a rogue nymph-like girl wearing a red cloak who has defected from a ladies' school in favor of rebellion and knows where Tony, along with Wendell and a smattering of other royal cabinet members, are secretly sheltering. Part 1, the first movie, would deal with the mystery of a flooded Central Park and our family's travels through the portal and the troubling negotiations with the pirates. Meanwhile, Part 2 begins with meeting this girl, who we'll call Red, and traveling through the Second Kingdom with her. I want them to be caught and chased by Second Kingdom appointed bounty hunters in league with the ladies' school. I think this would also be a good place where it's revealed that Red is the younger sister of the Second Kingdom's queen, who is occupying the Palace of White, and Red is trying to overthrow her. In order to continue their journey, Wolf and Andrew have to perform a heist and rescue Red. Meanwhile, Virginia effectively vests control of the pirate crew by appealing to the female trolls and spouting feminist rhetoric and talking about the advances of society in the 10th Kingdom. With their help, they drop her off in the port town they last left Wolf and Andrew, and she's accompanied by 2 of her troll crew. Part 3, perhaps Wolf, Andrew, and Red come across Tony and the gang. My plot gets a bit vague here because in truth, I only just came up with this as I typed up my script, so it's really all up in the air. There would be an army of the Second Kingdom's forces led by Red's sister terrorizing the landscape, and maybe Virginia makes a detour to the Troll Kingdom and appeals to the 3 troll children from the first movie. They know she didn't kill their father, so perhaps things are fine. They're still stupid, and while they don't care for Virginia or any humans, they love chaos and war, so they back her up by supplying her with an army of her own. I don't know. This is starting to sound like some kind of Game of Thrones shit. I may be losing some of the magic and the whimsy of the original plot, so I'll leave my idea here. The point is, this series is absolutely rife with sequel bait, or even series potential, and I'm mad at the world for letting Simon Moore and myself down. I need the content, and in fact, someone hire me for the content. I am a writer. I have a master's degree in creative writing in English. Please, just bring me on board. I know this series like the back of my hand. And that leads me to the end of this video. We can call this point number 8 simply for the sake of ending on a structured note. Conclusion. As a review of this entire video and the process of putting it together, I have to say, I absolutely had a blast, especially because reviewing a smaller amount of content really gave me a lot of room to talk about the characters and the plots in more detail. I didn't want this channel to just be a one-off. It's something I really look forward to doing, and I have a lot of passion for, and I can't wait to improve on this formula a little bit more. Beyond that, I'd like to thank you guys for watching. I sincerely hope you enjoyed. Please give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing if that's the case, because this is just the beginning. Also, comment if you're a fan of the 10th Kingdom or gave it a shot because of this video, because I look forward to hearing what you guys have to say. I love it. So, other than that, I will talk with you guys soon.